Hello everyone and welcome back to the Unexplained Diaries. Here on this channel I share real-life encounters with beings from beyond the skies to help you unwind and drift off to sleep. Before we dive in, I would love to hear from you. Leave a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and let's begin. I woke up because the house felt wrong. Not loud, not shaking, just a faint vibration that rolled through everything, like a truck passing far away but deeper, slower. It was strong enough that I noticed it in my chest and teeth, but nothing moved. No rattling glass, no buzzing phone, just that low, passing pressure, and then it was gone. I lay there staring at the ceiling, waiting for it to come back. It didn't. What did happen was the silence. The normal nighttime sounds didn't return right away. No distant highway noise, no crickets outside the window, no refrigerator cycling on. It felt like the house was holding its breath. I checked my phone. 2:47 a.m. I got out of bed and walked to the window in the spare room that faced the backyard. The glass was cold. The yard looked normal at first. Fence, the old maple near the shed, but the sky looked off. It took a few seconds to realize why. There were fewer stars, not clouds. The sky was clear. I could still see constellations I recognized, but above my house there was a dull patch, like someone had smudged the sky with their thumb. The stars weren't gone completely, they were just dimmer, like they'd been turned down. I stood there longer than I meant to. I remember thinking I should grab my phone and take a picture, but I didn't move. Something about the quiet made it feel wrong to break it. Eventually, the sky went back to normal. Not suddenly, just slowly, like my eyes were adjusting. The stars came back one by one until I couldn't tell what I'd been looking at anymore. I went back to bed. I didn't sleep much after that. The next morning, I told myself it was nothing. Maybe some weird atmospheric thing. Maybe I was half asleep. I had work, emails, errands, life filled in the space where the memory was trying to sit. I didn't think about it again until 2 nights later. This time, I was awake when it happened. I was on the couch watching something I wasn't really paying attention to. The volume was low. The room lights were off, except for the TV glow. That same vibration passed through the house. Same strength, same length. About 2 seconds, maybe 3. The TV didn't flicker. The picture stayed steady. I muted it. The silence afterward was immediate and heavy. I stood up and felt this weird pressure in my ears, like after an elevator ride. I swallowed a few times, but it didn't go away right away. I checked outside again. Same thing. The stars directly overhead were dimmer. Not gone, just thinned out. I called my sister Maya without really thinking about it. She answered groggy and annoyed. "Did you feel that?" I asked. "Feel what?" I hesitated. "Like a vibration? Just now?" There was a pause. "No, are you okay?" I told her I probably imagined it. We hung up. I stood there longer than I should have, staring at the sky like it might do something else. It didn't. After that, it started happening more often. Not every night. Not on a schedule I could track. Sometimes I'd feel it while I was lying down, sometimes while standing at the sink. Always the same low, rolling pressure, like something very large moving very slowly past the house. A week later, I noticed something else. I woke up and my phone battery was at 12%. I'd gone to bed with it at 78%. No apps running. No updates. Battery health was fine. I chalked it up to a glitch. The next time it happened, my phone was face down on the nightstand when I woke up. The camera app was open. No photo taken, just the camera, pointed at nothing. That morning, I checked my step counter out of habit. It showed movement between 2:40 and 2:52 a.m. Slow steps, back and forth, about the length of my hallway. I live alone. I started sleeping with the lights on. I told myself it was stress. I stopped checking the sky. Then came the sound. It wasn't loud. It was more like the vibration had learned how to make noise. A low hum, barely audible, but I could feel it in my chest. It came from above the house, not the attic. Above that, outside. The first time I heard it, I sat straight up in bed. The hum lasted maybe 10 seconds. When it stopped, the quiet afterward felt wrong, like my ears were still waiting for something. I ran outside without shoes on. The street was empty. No cars, no wind. Porch lights were on up and down the block, but no one else was outside. The sky above my house was dim again. I don't know how long I stood there, long enough that my feet went numb from the cold concrete. Eventually, the stars came back. The hum didn't. The next day, my neighbor Ron asked if I'd been doing work on my roof at night. He said he'd seen light over my house a few times that week. Just a glow. No sound. I told him no. He laughed and said maybe I was getting visited by UFOs. I laughed too, because that's what you do. That night, I sat outside on the back steps and watched the sky. The air felt thick like before a storm, but the forecast was clear. The vibration came again. Stronger this time. My teeth buzzed. The hum followed almost immediately. Low, steady, and close enough that my chest felt tight. Above me, the stars faded. Not all of them, just the ones directly overhead, forming a rough oval shape that didn't move with the rest of the sky. Inside that darker patch, something shifted. Not a clear shape. Just movement, like a shadow passing behind frosted glass. I couldn't tell how big it was. I couldn't tell how far away it was. That was the worst part. My brain kept trying to assign it a distance and failing. The hum deepened slightly. My ears rang. Then, just like before, everything stopped. The pressure lifted. The stars came back. The night noises returned all at once, loud and messy, like they'd been waiting. I went inside and locked the doors. I slept on the couch with all the lights on. It didn't happen again for almost a month. Long enough that I convinced myself it was over. Long enough that I stopped checking my phone battery in the morning. The last time was the worst. I was driving home late from Maya's place. Same route I'd taken 100 times. No music. Windows cracked. The sky ahead of me brightened softly, like dawn arriving early. But it wasn't harsh or blinding. Just a gentle glow spreading across the clouds. I slowed down without realizing it. The glow lifted upward like a curtain being pulled. It didn't move like light should. It moved as a single thing, smooth and controlled, revealing the dark sky behind it. My ears rang. The car felt heavy. The road felt longer. The next thing I remembered clearly was passing the old water tower near my exit. I'd already driven past it when the glow started. I checked the clock. 10 minutes had passed. I made it home. I locked the doors. I didn't look at the sky. That was months ago. It hasn't happened again. Not the vibration, not the hum. The stars look normal every night. But sometimes when I wake up just before dawn, the house feels like it's waiting for something to pass overhead. I noticed the light because it didn't flicker. I was halfway down Maple Ridge Road, the stretch that runs along the old quarry and then dips into the trees, when I looked up out of habit. I walked that road most nights after work, same route, same timing. It helped me unwind before going back to my apartment. Usually the sky was just stars and the occasional plane cutting across, blinking like it was supposed to. This light didn't blink. It sat above the tree line on my left, just barely visible between the branches. Dim, steady, about the size of a distant star, but lower. Too low. I slowed down without really thinking about it, craning my neck. The moment I stopped walking, the light stopped moving. That was the first thing that made my stomach tighten. I hadn't realized it was moving until it wasn't. It had been drifting along the tree line at the same pace I was walking. When I froze, it froze too. I stood there for a few seconds, listening to the gravel crunch under my shoes settle. No wind, no insects. Just that quiet you get when you're far enough from traffic that the world feels muted. I took one step forward. The light moved again. Same speed, same distance ahead of me, like it was keeping pace. I told myself it was a drone. Someone messing around, maybe one of the guys who lived in the newer houses up the hill. That explanation lasted about 10 seconds, until I noticed there was no sound. No hum, no buzz, nothing cutting through the quiet. Even cheap drones made noise. This was completely silent. I stopped again. The light stopped. My chest felt tight, like I just missed a step on a staircase. I remember laughing under my breath, mostly to hear something human. I waved my hand in the air, feeling stupid. "Okay," I said out loud. "Cool trick." The light didn't react. I checked my phone, partly to see the time, partly to ground myself. 10:47 p.m. No notifications. Full signal. The screen light felt harsh compared to everything else. When I started walking again, the light slid forward. Not faster, not slower, exactly matching me. I tried changing my pace. Slower steps, then quicker. Each time, it adjusted without hesitation, like there was no delay at all. It stayed above the same cluster of trees just ahead of me, never crossing into the open sky. I got the urge to run and hated myself for it. Running would make it worse. I didn't know why I believed that, but I did. Instead, I stopped completely and waited. 10 seconds passed, then 20. My legs started to feel tense, like they were coiled springs. The light stayed perfectly still, no wobble, no flicker. I turned around and walked backward a few steps, keeping my eyes on it. It moved backward too. That's when the quiet started to feel wrong. Not just empty, but pressed flat, like the air was heavier than it should have been. I noticed my ears felt slightly plugged, the way they do when you change elevation too fast. I turned around and headed back the way I'd come, toward the houses. The light followed, still above the tree line, still keeping that exact distance. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat now. I kept glancing down at the road, making sure I wasn't tripping, then back up at the trees. When I reached the spot where the road curved and the tree line thinned, I stopped again. The light stopped. Now it was easier to see. Still dim, still steady, but clearly separate from the stars behind it. It wasn't round exactly, more like smeared, like someone had taken a small flashlight and dragged it sideways just a little. I raised my phone and opened the camera. The second the screen came up, the light went out. Not faded. Gone. I stood there staring at empty branches, my phone held uselessly in front of me. The sudden darkness felt louder than any sound. After a few seconds, the normal night noises crept back in. Crickets. A distant car. Wind brushing leaves. I checked the camera roll anyway. Nothing. Just a blurry shot of trees. I didn't linger. I walked the rest of the way home fast, keys clenched between my fingers. I kept looking up, expecting the light to reappear somewhere else, but the sky stayed normal. That night, I didn't sleep much. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that steady glow hovering just ahead of me. The next night, I told myself I wasn't going to walk that road again for a while. I lasted until about 10:30 before I grabbed my jacket anyway. Routine has weight. It pulls. I took a different route, sticking closer to the houses, streetlights, sidewalks, people's porches. I felt ridiculous for being relieved. Nothing happened. No light, no weird quiet, just a normal walk. The third night, I went back to Maple Ridge Road. I don't know why. Curiosity, maybe. Or some dumb need to prove to myself that it had been a fluke. The light was there almost immediately. Same spot, same height, same dull glow hovering just above the tree line. This time, I didn't stop walking. I kept my pace steady and my eyes forward, like ignoring it would make it irrelevant. It followed. I felt watched in a way I hadn't before. Not like someone looking at me, but like something tracking me. Measuring distance. Matching movement. I stopped suddenly. It stopped. I whispered, "Why?" and hated how small my voice sounded. The light didn't change. I took a step toward the trees. The light didn't retreat. It stayed where it was, just ahead of me. Close enough now that I could see it wasn't casting any light onto the branches around it. The leaves stayed dark, untouched. I backed up. It slid back too. That's when I noticed my watch buzzing faintly against my wrist. Not a notification, just a soft vibration like it was struggling to get a signal. The screen was blank when I checked it. The air felt thicker again. My ears popped, lightly. I turned and walked away, not fast, not slow. The light followed until I reached the first streetlight at the edge of the neighborhood. The moment I stepped into the yellow glow, the light vanished. Just gone. No fade, no movement. 1 second there, the next empty sky. I stood under the streetlight for a long time, feeling exposed and strangely safe at the same time. The buzzing in my watch stopped. My ears cleared. I didn't go back to Maple Ridge Road after that. Weeks passed. Then months. I told myself it was over. A trick of perspective, a drone, something explainable that I'd blown out of proportion. Then one night, walking home from the grocery store, I noticed my shadow stretching too far ahead of me, longer than the streetlight should have allowed. I looked up. Above the tree line, far in the distance, a single dim light hovered, perfectly still. I stopped walking. So did the light. The road ahead started to glow while I was still a good 20 minutes from home. It wasn't bright, exactly. More like the color drain you get right before sunrise, when everything goes pale and flat. I remember thinking it was weird because it was barely past 2 a.m., and this stretch of highway runs east-west anyway, not toward anything that would catch early light. I eased off the gas without really meaning to. My headlights still worked, the dashboard looked normal, but the sky ahead had this soft, milky brightness that didn't match the rest of the night. The stars were still out behind me. In front of me, they were hard to see, like someone had rubbed a thumb across the windshield of the sky. I drive that road 4 or 5 nights a week. I know every bend, every mile marker, every rusted guardrail. It's muscle memory at this point. That's why the next part bothered me so much. The glow faded, not suddenly. It just thinned out, like fog lifting straight upward, and when the darkness came back, I was passing the old quarry turnoff. I didn't remember driving the last 10 minutes. I know how that sounds. People zone out all the time. But this wasn't that. Zoning out still leaves impressions. Taillights, road signs, something. This felt like skipping a chapter. 1 second I was easing off the gas, staring at the pale sky, and the next second, the car was humming along at speed again, the quarry road already in my rear view. I checked the clock. It was 2:31. I was sure it had been closer to 2:20 when the sky changed. I laughed once, just to hear myself do it. The sound felt wrong in the car, like the acoustics were off. Too quiet. The road noise seemed muted, like the tires were rolling over packed dirt instead of asphalt. I cracked the window. Cold air rushed in, sharp and real. That helped a little. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I'd convinced myself it was nothing. Fatigue, night driving, whatever. I went inside, locked the door, and stood in the kitchen longer than I needed to, listening to the house settle. Sleep didn't come easy. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that washed out sky again, like dawn trying to happen in the wrong place. The next morning, my phone showed I'd gotten home at 2:42. That was normal. What wasn't normal was the step count. It logged several minutes of movement between 2:20 and 2:35, more than what it usually recorded when I was just sitting in the car. I worked from home, so I didn't have to go out that day. Around noon, I walked down to the mailbox. The sky was clear, blue, nothing unusual. But standing there, I felt that same faint pressure in my ears I get when an elevator starts moving. It passed after a few seconds. That night, I took the same route again. I told myself I was being stupid, but I needed to know if it would happen twice. Nothing did. The road stayed dark, the stars stayed where they belonged, I made it home without incident and slept hard. 2 nights later, it happened again. This time I was ready for it. I saw the sky brighten ahead and immediately looked at the clock. 2:18 a.m. I said it out loud. 2:18. The glow was stronger this time. Not blinding, just wrong. The edges of things softened. The reflective paint on the road lost its bite. I tried to slow down, but my foot felt heavy, like the pedal wasn't responding the way it should. I reached to turn on the radio. It hissed with static and then settled into a low, steady tone that didn't match any station. The next thing I remember, the tone was gone. I was halfway past the quarry again. The clock said 2:30. My heart was pounding so hard my hands were shaking on the wheel. I pulled over this time, just stopped on the shoulder with the hazard lights blinking. The night was normal again. Crickets, distant traffic, the smell of warm asphalt. I sat there for a long time. I don't know how long, because I didn't trust the clock anymore. When I finally got home, I didn't sleep. I stayed up watching the backyard through the sliding glass door. Around 4 a.m., the motion light flicked on for a second, then off. The camera showed nothing. Over the next week, I started noticing small things. The same 10-minute gap showed up on my driving app twice more. Once, my neighbor Dan asked if I'd been outside late because he saw a car idling in my driveway after midnight. I hadn't been. The worst part was the feeling that came with it. Not fear, exactly. More like awareness. Like something had noticed me noticing it. On the 5th night, I didn't drive. I sat on the back steps instead, wrapped in a jacket, watching the sky. Just before dawn, the horizon brightened again. Soft, pale, quiet. It rose straight up this time, like a curtain lifting, and vanished. Birds started singing a few seconds later, confused and early. I went inside after that, locked the door, closed the blinds. I still drive that road. I don't have much choice. But when the sky ahead starts to thin, even a little, I pull over now. I wait it out. So far, that seems to help. The clock still skips sometimes, just a few minutes here and there. I don't know where they go. The first time the motion light came on, I was brushing my teeth and thought a car had pulled into the driveway. The bathroom window faced the backyard, not the street, but light carries weird at night, and I didn't think much of it. I rinsed, leaned forward to spit, and when I looked back up, the light was still on. Solid white. Too bright for a passing car. I finished up and walked to the back door in my socks. The glass was cold, fogged slightly where my breath hit it. The yard looked normal. Patchy grass, the old maple near the fence, my neighbor's shed, half visible over the boards. Nothing moved. No wind. Wind? No animals. The light shut off while I stood there watching, like it got bored of me. I checked the camera feed on my phone. The app loaded slow as usual. The clip showed the yard in night vision, grainy and gray. Timestamp matched the minute I'd been brushing my teeth. The motion box flashed red for about 2 seconds. Nothing was in frame. No distortion, no shadow, just empty grass and the fence. I shrugged it off and went to bed. The second night it happened, I was already half asleep on the couch. I'd put something dumb on TV for background noise and dozed off with my phone on my chest. The sudden wash of light through the living room window jolted me awake. For a split second, I thought it was morning. Then the TV was still on, and it was still dark outside. I sat up and looked out. Same thing. Yard empty. Motion light blazing. This time, as I stared at it, there was a quick flash in the sky. Not lightning, no thunder. Just a brief, pale pulse, like someone had flicked a dimmer switch on the clouds. It was over so fast I almost convinced myself I imagined it. Almost. The backyard light shut off a second later. I checked the camera again, same result. Motion alert, no visible movement. The sky flash didn't show up at all. The night vision stayed flat and gray. By the third night, I was waiting for it. I turned off all the lights in the house and sat at the kitchen table with the blinds tilted just enough to see the yard without reflecting my own face back at me. Midnight came and went. 1 o'clock. I started to feel stupid, like I'd built the whole thing up in my head. At 1:17 a.m., the motion light snapped on. At the exact same moment, the sky above the yard flashed. Not bright, just enough to notice. Like a camera flash from very far away, filtered through clouds. My stomach dropped in that quiet, heavy way it does when something stops feeling coincidental. I checked the time on my phone, then I checked the camera feed. Then I checked the time again because I suddenly didn't trust it. The timestamps all matched. I stayed up until almost 3 that morning. It didn't happen again. The next day I asked my neighbor, Carla, if she'd noticed anything weird at night. She lived alone and worked early shifts, usually asleep by 10. She laughed and said the only weird thing she'd noticed lately was how bright the sky had been some nights, like the city glow was worse than usual. She asked if I was seeing things again, half joking. I laughed too and changed the subject. That night, it happened twice. The first time was around midnight. Same pattern. Motion light, sky flash, nothing on camera. The second time was closer to 2, and that one felt different. The light stayed on longer. Almost 10 seconds. Long enough that my eyes adjusted and I could really take in the yard. Everything looked flat. Too flat. Like the depth was wrong. The tree didn't feel as far away as it should have. The fence line looked closer. Compressed, like the yard had been folded in on itself, just a little. Then the sky flashed again, a little stronger this time, and the light went out. When I checked the camera clip, my hands were shaking enough that I fumbled my phone. The footage still showed nothing, but there was a single frame where the contrast spiked, like the sensor had been overwhelmed for a fraction of a second. The timestamp skipped forward by 1 second after that frame. I didn't sleep. On the 5th night, I unplugged the motion light. I figured if it was broken, at least I'd stop getting startled awake. The yard stayed dark. No sudden brightness. No shadows. I sat on the couch with the TV off, listening to the house settle. At 12:42 a.m., the sky flashed anyway. The light wasn't there to mirror it this time, but the glow reflected faintly off the fence and the side of the house. It wasn't coming from any direction I could place. It felt like it was everywhere at once, low and diffuse. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. Motion alert. I opened the app and stared at the screen. The camera was still plugged in. Still working. The motion light was definitely unplugged. The clip showed the yard in darkness, the infrared grain heavier than usual. The motion box flashed red. Nothing moved. The timestamp jumped backward by 1 minute at the end of the clip. That was the night I finally went outside. I didn't plan to. I just found myself pulling on shoes and grabbing my jacket like my body had already decided before my brain caught up. The air felt thick when I opened the back door. Not warm, not cold, just dense, like humidity without the moisture. The yard smelled wrong. Not bad, just different, like after a storm, but there hadn't been one. I stood on the concrete patio and waited. For a long time, nothing happened. I started to feel ridiculous again. I was halfway through convincing myself to go back inside when the pressure changed. That's the only way I can describe it. My ears popped slightly, like being on a slow elevator. The sky flashed. This time it wasn't just light. There was a shape to it. A soft-edged brightness that slid across the clouds, not illuminating them so much as passing through them. The motion light, unplugged as it was, snapped on for half a second and then died. I took an involuntary step back. The camera on the house clicked. Not loudly, just a faint mechanical sound like it was refocusing. I looked up again and felt that same compression in my chest, the sense that the yard wasn't quite the size it should be. The tree felt closer. The fence felt too far away now, like the space between things was breathing. Then it was over. The sky went dark, the air felt normal, the motion light stayed off, the camera stopped clicking. I stood there until my legs started to ache. I went inside and locked the door, even though I knew how pointless that probably was. It stopped after that. Completely. No more motion alerts, no more sky flashes. The camera behaved normally. The yard looked like a yard again. A week later, Carla mentioned casually that she'd been having trouble with her porch light turning on for no reason. She said it always happened late at night, and she'd started unscrewing the bulb before bed. I told her maybe it was just wiring. I didn't check my camera footage anymore. I still don't leave the blinds open at night. Sometimes when I'm brushing my teeth, I swear the bathroom feels a little brighter than it should for just a second. Like dawn trying to start early and thinking better of it. I woke up because my arm was numb and my phone was warm in my hand. I'd fallen asleep scrolling like I usually did, but the screen was on in a way it never was. Not a video paused, not a notification, just the camera app open, pointed straight up at the ceiling. I lay there for a second, trying to remember if I'd done that on purpose. I hadn't. I was sure of it. I always lock my phone before I sleep. Always. I sat up and the room felt off, like when you stand up too fast and your ears fill for a second. Not dizzy, just thin. The photo thumbnail was right there, one image, timestamp 2:41 a.m. I tapped it. It showed my ceiling, but not how it normally looked. There was a pale glow spread across it like light diffused through fog. No fixture, no source, just brightness where there shouldn't have been any. It wasn't blown out or blurry. It looked deliberate, like something real the camera had captured. I checked the time, 6:18 a.m. I'd slept through my alarm, which never happened. My phone said I'd logged just over 4 hours of sleep, with a long gap in the middle where it showed nothing at all. No movement, no deep sleep, no light sleep, just blank. I live alone in a small rental house outside of Redfield. It's quiet there in a way that feels normal most of the time. Trees, a couple of neighboring houses spaced far apart, a 2-lane road you can hear when trucks pass late at night. Nothing unusual. That morning, the house felt wrong. Not messy or disturbed, just quiet in a heavier way than usual. I walked from room to room, checking windows, doors, the back porch. Everything was locked, no footprints outside, no signs anyone had been there. The only thing that stood out was the air. It felt cooler inside than it should have, even though the heat was set the same as always. When I brushed my fingers along the bedroom curtains, they felt faintly warm. Not sun warm. More like they'd been near something that gave off heat but didn't burn. I went to work anyway. I do inventory for an agricultural supply warehouse, early shifts, repetitive stuff. I tried to shake the feeling, told myself I'd sleepwalked or left the camera open by accident. But all day, my ears rang softly like after a loud concert, and my depth perception felt off by inches. I kept misjudging shelves, bumping boxes with my hip. At lunch, I showed the photo to Marissa from shipping. She frowned and said it looked like light pollution or a reflection. I asked her what would be reflecting. She didn't have an answer, just shrugged and said phones do weird stuff at night. That night, I set my phone face down on the dresser and turned it completely off. I left a lamp on in the living room because the dark felt heavier than usual. Outside, the sky was clear, stars sharp, no clouds, no wind. I woke up again at 2:38 a.m., this time because of a sensation, not a sound. It felt like pressure moving through the house, like standing near a passing train but without the noise. My chest tightened for a second, then released. I didn't move. I didn't reach for my phone. I just lay there, listening. The pressure faded, but the silence didn't return to normal. It was too complete, like the background hum of the world had been turned down. No insects, no distant cars, not even the faint electrical noise the house usually made. I finally sat up and looked toward the window. The curtains glowed faintly, the same pale color as the photo. Not bright enough to light the room, just enough to see the outline of the fabric. I stood and pulled them back. The yard was empty, trees still, no visible light source, but the sky above my house looked different. The stars were there, but fewer of them, like someone had erased a patch directly overhead. Not clouds, just absence. The glow faded while I watched. It didn't switch off. It thinned, pulled upward, and disappeared. When it was gone, the night felt normal again. Sound rushed back all at once. Crickets, a far-off engine, the refrigerator cycling on. My phone buzzed on the dresser. I hadn't turned it back on. The screen lit up by itself. Camera app open again. This time there were 3 new photos. All of them showed the ceiling. The same pale light. But the last one was angled slightly, as if the phone had been lifted and tilted. In that image, the edge of my bed was visible, and just beyond it, the faintest shadow that didn't match anything in the room. I didn't sleep after that. I sat on the couch until sunrise, lights on, phone in my pocket. Nothing else happened. Over the next week, small things kept piling up. My smartwatch logged steps between 2 and 3 a.m., even though I stayed awake. The backyard motion light triggered twice at night, but the camera showed only a brief white flash, no movement. Once, while taking the trash out at dusk, I felt that same pressure change, like my ears popping without pain. And for a second, the sky took on a dull silvery color before snapping back. I stopped turning my phone off at night. I wanted to know if it had happened again. I started placing it on the bed, camera facing up, plugged in. Nothing showed up for 3 nights. On the 4th night, I dreamed I was awake, staring at the ceiling, watching light move slowly across it like ripples on water. When I actually woke up, my phone was in my hand again. 1 new photo. This one wasn't the ceiling. It was the corner of the room near the door. Empty. Except the light was stronger there, concentrated, like something just out of frame was casting it. The timestamp read 2:41 a.m. I packed a bag that morning and stayed with my sister in the city for a few days. Slept fine. No photos, no pressure, no gaps in my sleep. When I went back home, everything looked the same as I'd left it. Quiet, normal. I still wake up sometimes and check my phone without meaning to. The camera hasn't opened by itself again. The photos are still there. I haven't deleted them. Some nights, when I'm lying in bed and the house settles, I swear the ceiling looks just a little brighter than it should, like it's remembering something I'm not. I sat on the old wooden bench by the lake because I couldn't sleep, and the house felt too quiet. It was late, close to midnight, and the air was still warm from the day. The water was smooth enough that it looked like dark glass, broken only by the occasional ripple from a fish. I had been coming to this lake since I was a kid, and at night it usually calmed me down. I skipped a small rock across the surface and watched the rings spread out and fade. That's when I noticed the reflection. At first, I thought it was just a star. The sky was clear, and the stars were bright enough to show on the water. But this was different. It was brighter, more focused. A clean white reflection moving slowly under the surface, like a flashlight beam shining straight down into the lake. I looked up right away, expecting to see a drone or a plane or someone with a light on the shore. There was nothing. No blinking lights, no movement in the sky, just stars and the dark outline of trees. When I looked back down, the reflection was still there. It moved in a straight line, smooth and steady, about 10 feet out from the bank. The light didn't ripple or scatter the way reflections usually do. It stayed tight, like it was attached to something solid beneath the water. I stood up and stepped closer, my shoes crunching softly on the gravel. I told myself it had to be something in the water, a boat light, maybe, even though no one ever took boats out that late, or some weird reflection from the road a mile away. But the angle didn't make sense. The light wasn't bouncing or shifting when I moved. It stayed where it was, sliding slowly under the surface. I walked along the shore, keeping pace with it. As I moved, it moved. Not away from me, not toward me. just matching my speed, staying the same distance from the bank. That's when I felt the first real wave of unease. Not panic, exactly. More like the sense you get when you realize you're alone in a place that suddenly feels bigger than it should. I stopped walking. The light stopped too. It didn't fade or flicker. It just froze in place beneath the water, perfectly still. The lake went quiet in a way I hadn't noticed before. No insects, no frogs. Even the faint sound of traffic in the distance seemed to drop away. I waited, barely breathing. After maybe 10 seconds, I took a single step to the left. The light moved again, sliding smoothly along under the surface, keeping pace with me. My heart started to beat harder, and I felt that tight pressure in my chest that comes right before fear fully sets in. I tried to laugh it off. I actually said out loud, "Okay, this is stupid," just to hear my own voice. The sound came out flat and small, like the air around me swallowed it. I crouched down and leaned closer to the water. The light was bright enough now that I could see it wasn't reflecting off the surface at all. It was coming from below, deep enough that it lit the water above it without breaking through. I dipped my fingers into the lake. The water was cold, colder than it should have been for that time of year. The light didn't react. It didn't scatter or distort. It stayed exactly the same, steady and white. I pulled my hand back quickly and wiped it on my jeans, my skin tingling. I stood up and backed away a few steps. The light stayed where it was, no longer matching me now that I'd stopped moving along the shore. I checked my phone, mostly out of habit. No signal. That wasn't unusual out there, but the screen dimmed faster than normal, like the battery was draining. I locked it and shoved it back into my pocket. I thought about leaving. I should have left. Instead, I walked back toward the bench and sat down, keeping my eyes on the water the whole time. The light began to move again. This time it drifted closer to the surface, slowly, carefully. The water above it brightened, and I could see faint shapes in the ripples, like something large passing beneath. Not a clear outline, just a sense of mass, of something displacing the water as it moved. I stood up again, my legs feeling stiff. The pressure in the air changed, like when a storm is about to roll in, but the sky stayed clear. My ears popped slightly, and for a second, everything sounded muffled, like I was underwater instead of the lake. The light stopped rising and hovered just beneath the surface, close enough that the water above it glowed. I whispered, "No," without really meaning to. The glow slid sideways, parallel to the shore, faster now, but still smooth. I turned and walked quickly along the bank, not wanting to run, but needing distance. The light kept pace again, matching me step for step. My chest tightened. I could feel my pulse in my throat. I kept walking until the gravel gave way to dirt and roots, the trees pressing closer. The light followed until the water grew darker and deeper near the bend in the shoreline. Then it did something I hadn't expected. It stopped following me. Instead, it moved straight out toward the center of the lake, accelerating smoothly, the glow shrinking as it went deeper. The water above it darkened again, the surface returning to normal like someone had flipped a switch. I stood there, staring, waiting for it to come back. Nothing happened. The night sounds returned all at once. Frogs, insects, the distant hum of a car. The pressure in my ears faded, leaving a faint ringing behind. I stayed there for a long time, watching the water, replaying what I'd seen, and trying to make it fit into something familiar. Eventually, my legs started to ache, and the fear gave way to exhaustion. I walked home without looking back. Inside, I locked the door and stood in the kitchen, listening to the normal sounds of the house. The clock ticked. The fridge hummed. Everything felt slightly off, like the house was a set built to look familiar. I didn't sleep much that night. The next morning, I went back to the lake in daylight. The water looked normal, clear near the shore, dark farther out. No sign of anything unusual. I told myself it was a reflection, a trick of light, fatigue. But sometimes late at night, I think about how that glow moved, how it stayed under the surface without ever breaking through, and how, when I looked up, there was nothing above the lake to explain it. The fog got thick fast, like someone had flipped a switch. 1 minute, I could see the reflectors on the shoulder. The next, I was down to maybe 30 feet. I slowed way down and cracked the window a bit because that always helped me feel more grounded, like I wasn't sealed inside a bubble. The air was cold and wet, and it smelled like dirt and leaves. I'd driven that road hundreds of times. It cut through farmland and then dipped into a low stretch near the river. No streetlights, just a few houses set way back from the road. At night, it was usually empty. That night was no different. No oncoming headlights, no taillights ahead of me. Just fog and my beams carving out a tunnel. I was thinking about work, half zoning out, when something darker than the fog showed up ahead. At first, I thought it was just a thicker patch, but it had edges, not sharp, but definite. It was hovering over the road maybe 15 or 20 feet up, right where the road dipped. I eased off the gas and leaned forward without realizing it, squinting. It wasn't moving. It wasn't swaying or drifting like fog does. It just hung there, a shape blocking out what little light the fog reflected back. I couldn't tell how big it was, only that it was wider than my lane. My first thought was a truck jackknifed sideways or farm equipment sticking out over the road, but there were no lights, no reflectors, nothing solid underneath it. The road below it was empty. I remember thinking very clearly that it didn't make sense, and then immediately after that, thinking I was probably misjudging distance. Fog messes with depth. I told myself that twice. Still, my hands tightened on the wheel. As I rolled closer, the shape stayed exactly where it was. My headlights didn't really hit it. The beams just kind of faded into it, like shining a flashlight into smoke, except the smoke didn't swirl or glow. It stayed dark. I slowed almost to a stop. My heart was pounding hard enough that I could feel it in my neck. I kept expecting it to drop or drift or do anything that would make it fit into the world better. It didn't. Then, all at once, the fog thinned. Not gradually. It was like someone wiped a window clean in front of me. In the space of a second, the road ahead was clear, stretching out empty and normal. The shape was gone. No trace of it. No shadow, no movement pulling away. Just road, fields, sheep, and the river trees off to the right. I hit the brakes harder than I meant to and stopped in the middle of the road. I sat there with the engine idling, staring at the spot where it had been. The air outside looked normal now, just a faint mist hugging the ground. Visibility was fine. I checked my mirrors, half expecting to see something behind me. Nothing. I opened my door and stood up on the pavement, feeling stupid, but needing to see it from outside the car. The night was quiet in that way rural nights are, not silent, just distant. Frogs near the river, something moving in the brush. There was no sign anything had ever been there. I told myself it was fog, a trick of light, maybe my brain filling in gaps. I got back in the car and kept driving. I didn't turn around. I didn't speed. I just drove like I always did. A few minutes later, I passed the old red barn that marked the halfway point to my place. That's when I realized something was off. I should have hit that barn sooner. I checked the clock on my dash. It said 11:48. I frowned, doing the math in my head. When I'd first slowed for the fog, it had been around 11:30. Maybe a little after. There was no way that stretch of road took 18 minutes, even creeping. I told myself I must have been wrong about the time. I reached for my phone, still sitting in the cup holder, and the screen lit up. 11:48. Same as the dash. I drove the rest of the way home on autopilot. Pulled into the driveway, shut the engine off, just sat there for a bit with my hands in my lap. The house was dark. No lights on inside. Everything looked normal. Inside, I locked the door behind me without thinking. I checked the windows, like I always did, then went into the kitchen for a glass of water. My hands were shaking a little when I noticed it. Not badly, just enough. I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw that dark shape hanging in the fog, not moving, just waiting. Eventually, I did fall asleep, sometime close to dawn. The next morning, I drove that same road in daylight. Clear skies, no fog. I slowed at the spot where it had happened. There was nothing unusual about it at all, just asphalt, a slight dip, fields on either side. I checked my car later that day, out of curiosity more than anything. No marks, no dirt where something might have brushed it. Nothing. For weeks after, every time fog rolled in, my stomach tightened. I kept expecting to see it again. I never did. But sometimes when the fog gets thick just right, I feel like I'm driving through a place where something doesn't line up the way it should, like the road is remembering something even if I'm trying not to. I still drive that way. I don't have another route. And most nights it's just a road through empty land same as it always was. But every once in a while, when the fog comes down fast and the world shrinks to headlights and breath, I slow way down and watch the space ahead of me, waiting to see if something darker than the night decides to be there again. The radio cut to static right as I stopped at the red light on Maple and 7th. It wasn't the usual quick burst you get when you pass under power lines. This was solid, heavy static like white noise pressed flat. Then a low tone came in underneath it. Not loud, more like something you felt in your chest than heard through the speakers. I took my foot off the brake for a second, thinking maybe I'd bump the dial, then put it back down. The light was still red. The intersection was empty in every direction. It was just 11 p.m., warm for early fall. Windows cracked because my AC had been acting up all week. The tone didn't change pitch. It just sat there, steady. I glanced at the radio screen. It still showed the same station. I reached out to turn the volume down, and that's when everything outside the windshield dimmed for a split second, like someone had lowered a dimmer switch on the world. Then I saw the light. It hovered above the center of the intersection, maybe 30 or 40 feet up. Not bright, not sharp, just a dull, soft glow like a reflection off frosted glass. It didn't cast light onto the road, it didn't pulse or flicker, it was just there. I remember thinking, very calmly, that it looked unfinished, like it hadn't fully decided what it was supposed to be. The low tone stopped. The static cut out at the same instant. My radio went dead quiet, not even the faint hiss you usually hear when nothing's playing, and the light was gone. The traffic signal clicked green. I sat there longer than I should have, long enough that I had a clear thought of, someone's going to come up behind me and honk. But no one did. The intersection stayed empty. My hands were tight on the steering wheel, and I hadn't realized how tight until my fingers started to ache. I drove through the light and kept going, heart picking up speed like it was trying to catch up to something that already happened. I told myself it was a reflection, or a drone, or some weird atmospheric thing I didn't have a name for. That explanation felt thin, but it was better than sitting with the idea that something had been there and then wasn't. The rest of the drive home felt off. Not dramatic, just wrong in small ways. Streetlights seemed farther apart than usual. The dark between them felt deeper. My radio wouldn't turn back on, even after I switched stations twice and restarted the car at another red light. When I got home, I parked in my usual spot in front of the duplex and sat for a minute with the engine running. The house across the street was dark. So was mine. My upstairs neighbor, Kyle, usually left his porch light on, but it was off that night. I went inside, locked the door, and checked my phone. No missed calls, no alerts. The time looked normal. I didn't tell anyone that night. The next morning, I woke up feeling like I hadn't slept enough, even though I'd gone to bed early. My jaw hurt like I'd been clenching it. While I was making coffee, my phone buzzed with a text from my sister, Erin. "Did you hear anything weird last night? Like a noise?" I stared at the screen longer than I should have before replying. "What kind of noise?" I typed. She responded a minute later. "Hard to explain, like a hum. Thought it was a truck outside, but it wasn't moving." I didn't mention the light. I just said no, must have slept through it. That should have been the end of it. A weird moment at a red light. Something half remembered that fades when you don't poke at it. But over the next few days, little things kept lining up in ways that made it harder to ignore. On Tuesday night, my radio cut out again while I was driving, this time on Pine Road. No tone, just silence. When I checked the time later, I realized I'd arrived home 8 minutes later than usual, even though traffic had been lighter than normal. On Wednesday, Kyle asked me if I'd been outside around midnight the night before. He said he'd woken up because his room felt pressurized, which was his word, not mine, like his ears needed to pop. He laughed it off, but he kept rubbing the side of his neck while he talked. On Thursday, my porch light turned on by itself at 11:07 p.m. I know the exact time because I was standing at the sink looking at the clock on the stove when the light through the window suddenly brightened. I checked the bulb later. It wasn't on a timer. The switch was still in the off position. I started sleeping with my phone face down on the nightstand. Not because I expected anything to happen, but because the glow of the screen started to bother me more than usual. Light felt intrusive, like it was paying attention. Friday night, I couldn't shake the feeling that the house was too quiet. Not peaceful quiet, empty quiet. The kind you get right after a storm passes and everything's holding its breath. Around 12:30 a.m., I heard the faintest crackle of static. Not from the radio, not from my phone. Just in the air, like when you're about to touch something metal after walking on carpet. It lasted maybe 3 seconds. I didn't move. I didn't sit up. I just listened. Nothing followed. No hum, no tone, no light. The next morning, my phone battery was at 12%, even though I'd gone to bed with it nearly full and nothing running in the background. I chalked it up to the battery getting old, even as that explanation felt forced. Saturday evening, I drove past the same intersection on Maple and 7th. I hadn't planned to. It just happened to be the route my GPS suggested. The light was red when I arrived. I sat there watching the empty road, my pulse loud in my ears. The radio played normally. No static, no tone. The light turned green. Nothing happened. I laughed out loud, a short, sharp sound, and drove on. That night, I dreamed of standing in the intersection, looking up. In the dream, the light wasn't above me. It was below, reflected in something I couldn't see. The radio tone was coming from inside my chest. I woke up before dawn, heart racing, sheets twisted around my legs. I checked my phone. No new photos, no open apps. The time was normal. But when I looked out the window, the sky over the rooftops had a faint, dull glow to it. Not sunrise. Too early, too flat. It faded slowly, like someone easing off a dimmer. I stood there until it was completely gone. Nothing else happened after that. Not really. No more lights, no more tones. The radio behaved. My phone battery stabilized. Life went back to its usual manageable shape. But every time I stop at a red light late at night, I catch myself looking up instead of forward. And every time the radio hisses for even a fraction of a second between stations, my chest tightens like it's waiting for something to come back. Whatever it was didn't feel curious. It didn't feel hostile either. It felt brief, like something passing through without fully stopping. I woke up because I was already halfway sitting up. That sounds weird, but that's the best way I can explain it. My body moved before my brain caught up. I was upright in bed, heart racing, staring at the space beside my dresser like someone had just stepped out of view. The room was dark. No movement, no sound. I stayed still, listening. The house was quiet in that deep way it gets around 3 or 4 in the morning, when even the fridge seems to hold its breath. I could hear my own pulse in my ears. I remember thinking I must have had a nightmare, except I couldn't remember dreaming anything at all. I reached over and checked my phone. 3:17 a.m. That's when I noticed the curtains. I sleep with blackout curtains pulled closed because the streetlight outside my place is bright enough to feel like daytime. The curtains hang maybe a foot from the side of my bed. As I shifted, my knuckles brushed the fabric. It was warm. Not sun-warmed, obviously. More like when you hold your hand near a running laptop fan or stand near something that was hot a few minutes ago but isn't anymore. It wasn't burning or anything, just not room temperature. I pressed my palm flat against it and left it there. Definitely warmer than the wall, warmer than the air. I pulled my hand back and just sat there, staring at the dark shape of the window. My first thought was that maybe the heater kicked on and blew air up there somehow, but the heater vent is on the opposite side of the room, near the floor, and the heat in my place is uneven at best. It never warms the curtains. I slid out of bed and stood barefoot on the carpet. The floor was cold, the air was cold, only the curtain felt wrong. I pulled it back an inch. The window itself felt normal. Cool glass, no condensation, no glow from outside. Just the usual empty street, parked cars, and the tree across the road. The streetlight hummed quietly, like it always did. I stood there for a while waiting for something else to happen. Nothing did. Eventually, I convinced myself it was some stupid heat thing I didn't understand, closed the curtain, and went back to bed. I didn't really sleep after that. I kept waking up every few minutes, half expecting to see a shape standing at the edge of the room. Morning came with gray light and rain tapping on the roof. I almost forgot about the whole thing until I got dressed and brushed against the curtain again. It was room temperature. I didn't think much about it during the day. I work remote doing support tickets for a software company, so my days blur together. I answered emails, made coffee, Took a call from my sister Maya complaining about her landlord. Normal stuff. That night, though, I couldn't shake the feeling. I kept glancing at the window like it might do something. I left the curtains open for a while, then closed them again. I slept badly. Nothing happened the second night. The third night, though, I woke up the same way. Already sitting up, same spike of fear, same sense that I wasn't alone. This time, before I even touched the curtain, I noticed something else. The room felt off. That's vague, I know, but it was like the silence had weight to it. No distant traffic, no wind. Even the usual low electrical hum from the walls felt muted. I reached out and touched the curtain. Warm again. Not hotter than before, but the same exact kind of warmth, localized. As if something had been there recently, close enough to heat it, then moved away. I pulled the curtain back more this time. The street outside was empty. The tree branches were perfectly still despite the forecast calling for wind. The streetlight was on, but it looked dimmer somehow, like someone had turned the brightness down a notch. That's when I noticed the sky. I don't mean stars or anything dramatic. I mean the general color. Normally, even at night, there's that faint orange glow from the city reflecting off the clouds. This time it looked darker. Not pitch black, just missing something. Like someone erased part of it. I stood there holding the curtain, staring out, trying to spot movement. My reflection stared back at me in the glass, pale and tired looking. Then my ears popped. That sudden pressure change you get in an airplane or an elevator. It happened instantly, with no warning. I staggered a little and had to grab the window frame to steady myself. The warmth on the curtain faded under my fingers. It didn't cool gradually. It just wasn't warm anymore. At the same time, sound rushed back into the world. I heard a car pass somewhere far off. Wind rustled the leaves. The streetlight brightened to its normal level. I stood there shaking for a long time. The next morning, I checked my phone the second I woke up. I don't know what I expected to find. Missed calls, weird notifications, anything. Nothing, except my sleep app showed a gap. I use one of those apps that tracks movement and sound while you sleep. It's mostly useless, but I had it running out of habit. According to the graph, there was a solid 10-minute block labeled no data right around 3:15 a.m. Not low movement, not quiet, just nothing recorded at all. I tried not to jump to conclusions. Apps glitch, phones bug out. I told myself that over and over. That night, I set my phone on the nightstand with the camera facing the window. I don't know why. I didn't consciously decide to. It just felt important. I woke up to my alarm in the morning, groggy and disoriented. Sunlight was coming through the curtain. Everything felt normal. Then I looked at my phone. The camera app was open. There was one photo taken at 3:16 a.m. It was grainy and dark, taken from the angle of the nightstand, pointed up toward the ceiling and the top of the curtains. At first, I didn't see anything unusual. Then I zoomed in. There was a faint glow along the upper edge of the curtain. Not bright. More like a soft wash of pale light, as if something outside the window was emitting it. The glow didn't cast shadows. It didn't reflect off the wall. It just existed. I checked the metadata. No flash, no long exposure. Just a normal photo. I stood there staring at it, trying to rationalize it. Passing headlights, a neighbor with a flashlight, anything. But my window faces the street at an angle. Car lights don't hit it like that. And even if they did, they wouldn't heat the fabric. I called in sick to work that day. That evening, I went over to my neighbor Dan's place. Dan lives next door and is the kind of guy who always has tools in his garage and strong opinions about everything. I didn't tell him the whole story. Just asked if he'd noticed anything weird at night recently. Lights, power flickers, anything. He frowned and said his motion light had been coming on randomly around 3 in the morning. No footage, though. Camera never caught anything. That was enough to make my stomach drop. I didn't sleep at home that night. I stayed on my couch with the lights on, curtains open. Nothing happened. The night after that, I woke up again. Same feeling, same position, same fear. But this time, before I touched the curtain, I noticed the room wasn't completely dark. There was a faint, pale glow seeping through the fabric, barely there like moonlight through fog, except the moon was on the other side of the house. I stood up slowly. My legs felt weak. I didn't want to look, but I did anyway. The curtain was warm, warmer than before. I pulled it back. There was no shape, no craft, no figure, just the sky. Except the sky wasn't right. It looked thinner. That's the only word I have for it. The clouds were there, but they didn't look solid. And there were fewer stars than there should have been, as if something massive was blocking them without being visible. The glow faded as I watched, not dropping or shooting away, just receding upward until it wasn't there anymore. The warmth drained from the curtain, the pressure in my ears released. Sound returned. I stood there until dawn. Nothing else happened after that. No more warm curtains, no more missing data, no strange photos. I still live here. I still sleep in that room, but I don't close the curtains anymore. I was about 3 miles into the trail when everything went quiet. Not gradually, not the way it does when the wind shifts or birds spook. It was like someone hit a mute button. 1 second there were insects buzzing, leaves rustling, something moving off to my right in the brush. The next second, nothing. No wind. No birds, no distant highway noise, just my own breathing and the faint squeak of my boots on gravel. I stopped without really deciding to. My body just did it. I remember thinking my ears were ringing, like after a loud concert, but it wasn't that. It was more like pressure, the way it feels right before your ears pop on an airplane. I swallowed a few times and looked around, waiting for the forest to start back up. It didn't. I was hiking alone in the San Juans on a trail I'd done twice before. It was late afternoon, overcast but warm, one of those days where the clouds sit low and make everything feel closer. I'd told my sister, Marin, where I was going. I had water, snacks, a headlamp. Nothing about the situation felt risky until the silence hit. That was when I noticed the shimmer. It was ahead of me, maybe 40 or 50 feet down the trail, hanging between two trees. At first I thought it was heat distortion, like when the road ripples on a hot day, but the air wasn't hot. It wasn't cold either, just normal. The shimmer didn't move with the breeze because there was no breeze. It didn't spread or fade at the edges, it just hung there. I took a step back. Gravel crunched under my heel, louder than it should have been in the quiet. The shimmer stayed exactly where it was. I stood there longer than I meant to. I kept waiting for my brain to supply a reasonable explanation. Sunlight through moisture, a trick of my eyes, fatigue. But the longer I looked, the more wrong it felt. The shimmer wasn't transparent exactly. It was like the background behind it was slightly delayed, like it was being redrawn a fraction of a second late. I raised my phone without taking my eyes off it. My hands were shaking, which annoyed me. I wasn't panicking. I didn't feel panicked. I just felt watched in a way I couldn't explain. The moment my phone unlocked, the shimmer collapsed in on itself. That's the only way I can describe it. It didn't fade. It didn't drift away. It pulled inward and vanished, like someone had pinched the air and let go. And just like that, the forest came back. Birds started up all at once, overlapping calls like they'd been waiting their turn. Wind moved through the trees. Something skittered away in the undergrowth to my left. It was so sudden I actually flinched. I stood there with my phone still in my hand, screen glowing, recording nothing. I checked the time. It was 4:12 p.m. I could have sworn it had been closer to 3:40 when I stopped walking, but I didn't trust that thought enough to dwell on it. I finished the hike faster than I planned, not running, but not stopping either. Every time the trail curved or dipped, I half expected the quiet to slam down again. It didn't. Everything stayed normal, aggressively normal, like the forest was trying too hard. Back at my car, I sat with the door open for a while before driving off. I kept listening to the world, to the distant rumble of another car on the road, the tick of my engine cooling. I didn't feel relieved. I felt unsettled in a low, constant way, like something hadn't finished with me. That night at home, I tried to talk myself out of it. I cooked dinner. I called Marin and told her the hike was nice. I didn't mention the shimmer. I didn't mention the silence. Saying it out loud felt like giving it weight. I woke up around 2 a.m. with the sense that someone was standing in my room. Not a dream. I know the difference. My eyes were open. I could see the outline of my dresser, the dim streetlight leaking through the curtains. I couldn't move at first, which I chalked up to sleep paralysis, except I could move. I tested it. My fingers twitched. My legs shifted under the blanket. The feeling didn't go away. I sat up, heart pounding, and that was when I noticed the curtains. They were warm, not sun-warmed, not stuffy room warm. They felt like they'd been near a heater. I pressed my palm flat against the fabric, expecting it to cool as I touched it. It didn't. I pulled the curtain back and looked outside. The yard was empty. The sky was clear, stars sharp and bright. No lights, no movement, no sound except the low hum of the fridge from the kitchen. When I let the curtain fall back into place, it was cool again. I didn't sleep much after that. Over the next week, small things started piling up. My fitness tracker logged steps between midnight and 12:20 a.m. on 3 separate nights, even though I was in bed. My phone battery drained faster than usual, sometimes dropping 10% in minutes while sitting idle. Once, while brushing my teeth, I noticed the bathroom mirror fogging slightly, even though the water wasn't hot. I kept checking outside when things felt off. I never saw anything directly. No shapes, no figures. Just the sense that the space above me, the space between things, wasn't empty in the way it should be. I went back to the trail 2 weeks later with a friend, Eli, partly to prove to myself that nothing would happen. It was a different day. Clear skies, mid-morning. The forest sounded alive and normal. We walked past the spot where I'd seen the shimmer. Nothing happened. No silence. No distortion. I felt almost stupid for the relief that washed over me. On the drive home, Eli asked why I'd been so tense the whole hike. I told him I'd thought I'd seen something strange out there once. He laughed and said, "Man, these mountains mess with your head." I didn't argue. That night, lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling for a long time. At some point, I noticed the stars outside my window looked fewer than usual, like a patch of sky had been smudged. I blinked, and they were back. I don't know what I saw on that trail. I don't know what stood near my bed, or if anything did at all. I only know that sometimes when the house is quiet and the air feels too still, I get the same pressure in my ears I felt that day in the forest. And I don't stop walking anymore when that happens. I was pulling over to stretch my legs when I saw it. I'd been driving west on Route 62 for hours, the part that cuts through nothing but scrub and old fence lines. The sun had dropped behind the hills, but the sky still held that dull orange-blue mix that sticks around longer in the desert. My name's Aaron Blake. I was 34 at the time, working construction in Phoenix, driving back from a job near Joshua Tree. I'd made that drive more times than I could count. I killed the engine and stepped out because my knees were stiff and my head felt full, in that way it does after too much road noise. No wind, no traffic, just that low evening quiet where even your own breathing feels loud. That's when I noticed the light. At first, I thought it was a plane. There's a military base far enough away that you get weird flight paths sometimes. But this wasn't blinking. It was a steady white, not bright like a spotlight, not dim like a star. It moved slowly from left to right, smooth enough that my eyes had trouble tracking it at first. I leaned against the hood and watched it, waiting for the usual signs to click into place. Engine noise, a change in altitude, anything familiar. Nothing. It glided, and I mean glided, like it wasn't pushing through air at all. No wobble, no correction, just a clean, flat motion. I remember thinking I should grab my phone, then not doing it. Part of me didn't want to break whatever was happening by looking away. The light slowed. It didn't drift or arc, it just reduced speed, like someone turning down a dimmer switch. Then it stopped. Not hovered, stopped. It sat there, fixed in the sky for maybe 2 seconds, maybe 5. Time felt soft around it, like my brain wasn't keeping good records. Then it dropped, straight down. No curve, no angle, no acceleration ramp up. It was there, and then it wasn't, like someone erased a line from the sky. I actually laughed once, short and sharp, because my body didn't know what else to do. I waited for a flash or a sound or dust or something on the horizon. Nothing happened. The sky looked normal again. Same colors, same empty stretch. If I hadn't been staring at that exact patch, I would have missed it entirely. I stood there longer than I meant to, listening. My ears felt tight, like after you leave a loud room. The quiet wasn't peaceful anymore. It felt watchful. I got back in the car and drove. For a while, that was it. No missing time, no marks, no follow-up. Just a story that didn't fit anywhere. But about 20 minutes later, I realized my dash clock didn't make sense. I'd reset it that morning after the battery hiccuped. I knew what time it was when I stopped. The clock said I was 9 minutes ahead of where I should have been. Not hours. Not something dramatic. just enough to be wrong. I told myself I'd misremembered. Desert drives mess with your sense of time, so I let it go, until the radio started acting up. I had it tuned to a classic rock station out of Palm Springs. Clear signal most of the way, it faded into static without warning, then settled into this low, even tone. Not feedback, not buzzing. A single note, steady and flat like a test signal. It wasn't loud, but I felt it more than I heard it. A pressure behind my eyes. My chest felt tight, like when you hold your breath too long. I reached to turn the knob and the tone cut out instantly. The station snapped back like nothing had happened. A mile later, the headlights washed over something metallic. Just a flash. It reflected back at me from above the road, not on it, maybe 15 feet up, enough that my stomach dropped before my brain caught up. I hit the brakes. The road was empty. No sign, no wires, no drone, just open air and the asphalt stretching forward. I sat there with my foot on the brake, heart thudding, waiting for something else to happen. When nothing did, I drove the rest of the way in silence. That night, I barely slept at the motel in Blythe. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt like I'd missed something important by blinking at the wrong moment. The next morning, my phone battery was at 12%. I'd plugged it in overnight. The usage screen showed activity between 2:11 and 2:19 a.m. Steps recorded. Location pings behind the motel near the edge of the lot. I didn't remember getting up. When I pulled the curtain back, the fabric felt warm, not sun-warmed. The sun wasn't up yet, just warm, like it had been held close to something that wasn't there anymore. I stood there for a long time, watching the sky lighten the normal way this time, waiting for something else to peel back or drop or glide across it. Nothing did. I drove home later that morning. Same road, same landmarks, everything where it belonged. But every now and then, especially at dusk, I still catch myself watching the sky instead of the road, waiting for something to pause where it shouldn't and decide to leave in a way nothing else does. The power went out while I was rinsing a mug in the sink. The kitchen lights cut off so cleanly that for half a second, I thought I'd blinked and missed something. The refrigerator stopped humming. The house settled into that quiet you only notice when it's forced on you. I stood there with my hands still under the tap, water running, until I realized the pump would probably cut too. I shut it off and listened. No distant traffic, no neighbor's TV through the walls, just my own breathing and the faint tick of cooling metal somewhere in the house. This kind of outage wasn't rare where I lived. I rented a small place on the edge of town, backed up to open fields and a line of trees that marked the start of state land. Storms knocked the power out a few times every summer. But this night was clear. No wind, no clouds. I'd been sitting on the couch 10 minutes earlier with the windows open because it was still warm out, listening to cicadas. I walked to the living room window and looked outside out of habit. The streetlights were off, all of them, down the entire road. Usually at least one house would still have a generator running, but everything was dark. My car sat in the driveway as a low shape, barely visible. That was when I noticed the sky. At first, I thought my eyes were just adjusting too fast. The sky looked wrong in a way I couldn't pin down immediately. It wasn't black like it should have been. It wasn't even that deep blue you get on clear nights. It was lighter, flat, almost reflective. I stepped out onto the porch. The sky had turned a dull silvery gray, not glowing exactly, more like the color of metal when it catches light, except there was no light source, no moon, no clouds reflecting city glow. The whole sky from horizon to horizon looked washed out and heavy, like a ceiling. The fields behind my house were still dark. The trees were dark, the ground was dark. It was just the sky. I remember thinking it looked close, lower than it should be. I stood there barefoot on the concrete, my hand resting on the doorframe. The air felt still but not calm. There was pressure in it, like when a storm is about to break but hasn't yet. My ears felt faintly clogged, the way they do when you drive up a mountain too fast. Somewhere down the road, a car door slammed. The sound carried farther than it should have. I glanced to my left and right, half expecting to see neighbors outside, pointing, talking. But no one else was out. No porch lights flicked on. No voices. I pulled my phone out of my pocket. The screen lit up normally, full signal. No emergency alerts. The time looked right. I lifted it to take a photo, more out of instinct than anything else. Before I could tap the camera, the sky changed. It didn't fade gradually. It didn't flicker. The silvery gray pulled upwards, straight up, like a curtain being lifted from the horizon to directly overhead. The motion was smooth and fast. In less than a second, the sky was dark again. Normal. Stars visible. Empty. I stood there with my phone half raised, staring at nothing. A moment later, the streetlights snapped back on. One by one, all down the road, my porch light came back without me touching the switch. Inside, the refrigerator kicked on. The house filled with noise again. The whole thing couldn't have lasted more than 5 seconds. I stayed outside longer than I meant to, scanning the sky, waiting for something else to happen. Nothing did. The stars looked normal. The air pressure eased, or maybe I just stopped noticing it. Eventually, I went back inside. I didn't sleep well. I kept waking up and checking the time, listening for changes in the house. The power stayed on. Nothing else happened that night. The next morning at work, I mentioned the outage to my coworker Mark while we were getting coffee. "Did the power go out where you are?" I asked. He shrugged. "Not that I noticed. I was up late too." I asked a few other people. Some had lost power, some hadn't. No one mentioned the sky. That should have been the end of it. I told myself it was some weird atmospheric thing or my eyes playing tricks on me in the dark. I let it go, mostly. Then it happened again. About a week later, same time of night, around 10:30, I was sitting on the couch, lights on, scrolling on my phone. The power cut out so abruptly that my TV went black mid-sentence. This time I felt it before I saw anything. That same pressure in the air, like the room had sealed itself. I stood up immediately and went to the window. Outside, the streetlights were already off. The sky had already changed. That same dull gray filled the view, uniform and heavy. It didn't shimmer. It didn't move. It just sat there, wrong. I didn't go outside this time. I stood in the doorway, barefoot on the rug, gripping the frame harder than I realized. I checked my phone. No signal now. The screen showed 0 bars. The time still ticked forward. I tried the camera anyway. The screen showed the gray sky, but flatter than it looked to my eyes, like it couldn't quite capture it. I noticed then that it was quiet in a different way. Not just no electricity. The insects were gone. No crickets, no distant dogs, nothing. I became very aware of how alone my house was. The sky lifted again, exactly the same way. Upward, smooth, fast. Darkness returned. Stars snapped back into place like someone had flipped a switch. The power came back a few seconds later. This time, I checked my phone immediately. The signal returned. No missed alerts, no messages. The photo I thought I'd taken wasn't there. I slept on the couch with the lights on. After that, I started paying closer attention. The outages weren't on any schedule I could find, but they were always at night, always clear weather, always quiet. On the third time I was outside already, sitting on the porch with a beer. I felt the pressure shift and looked up just as the sky changed. I watched it without moving, forcing myself not to blink, trying to notice details. There were no clouds, no texture. The gray wasn't light coming from somewhere. It was like the absence of darkness. I realized something else then. The horizon line stayed where it was. The trees didn't silhouette against the gray. It was like the sky and the ground weren't interacting the way they normally did. My phone lost signal again. The screen dimmed slightly on its own. The sky lifted. The lights came back. I noticed my hands were shaking. I started checking local outage reports. Sometimes there was nothing listed at all. Sometimes there'd be a vague entry. Brief interruption. 'Cause unknown. I drove around one night after it happened, just to see if it was localized. The town looked normal. Lights on, people out, no gray sky. When I drove back toward my place, everything stayed normal. The next time it happened, I was in the shower. The water cut off mid-rinse. The bathroom went silent, except for the ringing in my ears. I stepped out dripping and went to the window in a towel. The sky was already gray. That time, it lingered longer. Long enough for me to notice something else. The stars didn't disappear. They were still there, but dimmer, like they were being seen through a layer of frosted glass. I thought I saw movement up there. Not a shape, just a subtle shift, like something passing behind the gray. I didn't look away. The sky lifted. Everything came back. I checked the clock afterward. The power had been out for 7 minutes. I couldn't remember standing at the window for that long. The last time it happened was the one that finally pushed me to write this down. I was asleep. I woke up because the house felt wrong. That pressure again, heavier than before. My ears rang softly. I sat up in bed and realized the power was off. I went to the window and pulled the curtain aside. The sky was gray, but this time it wasn't uniform. There was a subtle gradient, darker in one area, like a shadow behind it. I felt watched in a way that didn't come from a direction I could point to. I stepped back from the window. The floor felt faintly warm under my feet. The sky lifted. The lights came back. I stood there in my bedroom, heart pounding, trying to convince myself I'd imagined the shadow. The next morning, my neighbor across the road asked me if my power had gone out again. I said, "Did you see the sky?" He frowned. "What sky?" I didn't push it. The power hasn't gone out again since. Weeks have passed. Everything looks normal, but now some nights when it's clear and quiet, I'll catch myself staring up at the stars, waiting for them to dim, waiting for the gray to come back down. And sometimes, for just a second, the sky looks thinner than it should be. I was about 3 blocks from my place when I noticed my shadow didn't line up with the streetlights anymore. It was late, just after midnight, warm enough that the air still felt thick even though the sun had been gone for hours. I'd stayed too long at my friend Evan's place watching a game and didn't feel like waiting on a rideshare, so I walked. I'd done the route 100 times. Same cracked sidewalks, same cars parked half on the curb, and same porch lights left on all night by people who didn't trust the dark. I was halfway down Maple when I realized my shadow was stretching way farther than it should have. Not just a little long, but pulled out thin, like it was being dragged forward by something ahead of me. The streetlight behind me was the same distance it always was. Nothing had changed there. But the shadow reached almost to the next intersection. I stopped walking without really thinking about it. The shadow didn't stop right away. It slid forward another foot, then froze. That was the first moment my stomach dropped. It wasn't dramatic fear, more like the sudden understanding that something wasn't following the rules I expected it to. I shifted my weight from one foot to the other. The shadow lagged, like a video buffering, then snapped back into place under me. I laughed out loud just once, sharp and nervous. I told myself it was the angle of the light, or maybe my eyes adjusting. I'd had a couple beers, not enough to be drunk, but enough to second-guess myself. I started walking again. 2 steps in, the glow overhead dimmed. Not the streetlights, they stayed on, but the sky itself seemed to dull, like someone had turned the contrast down. The stars faded first, then the dark between them smoothed out into something flatter, grayer. I looked up automatically, expecting clouds, but there weren't any. The night just looked thinner. That's when the glow appeared. It wasn't bright. It didn't light anything up. It was more like a smudge of pale light sliding across the sky, too even to be a plane and too steady to be anything burning. It moved silently, drifting overhead in a straight line, slow enough that I could track it without turning my head. As it passed, my shadow stretched again, longer this time, pulled forward and slightly to the side, looks like there was another light source somewhere above and ahead of me. I stopped. The glow stopped too. It didn't flicker or wobble. It just paused, hanging there. The silence deepened in a way I didn't know was possible. No cars, no insects. Even the distant hum of the highway seemed to drop out, like someone had closed a door far away. I stood there, hands hanging uselessly at my sides, trying to decide if I should run or stay perfectly still. My heart was beating hard enough that I could feel it in my throat. I remember thinking that if I moved, and it moved with me again, I'd lose it completely. So I didn't move. After a few seconds, maybe longer, I'm not sure, the glow dimmed. It didn't shoot away or vanish suddenly. It just faded, thinning out until it was gone, like breath on glass evaporating. The moment it disappeared, my shadow snapped back under my feet. The night rushed back in all at once. A car passed somewhere nearby. Leaves rustled, a dog barked a few houses down. It was like someone had unpaused the world. I stood there shaking, staring at the empty sky, waiting for something else to happen. Nothing did. I walked the rest of the way home fast, not running but close. I kept glancing at the ground to make sure my shadow behaved itself. It did. Everything looked normal again, painfully normal. When I got inside, I locked the door and leaned against it for a minute, just breathing. I didn't turn on the lights right away. I don't know why. I just stood there in the dark, listening. Eventually, I went to bed. Sleep didn't come easily, but I must have passed out at some point. The next morning, my phone buzzed with a text from Evan asking if I'd made it home okay. I typed back, yes, almost added something about the walk, then deleted it. I didn't want to sound insane. I checked the time. It was later than I thought. I scrolled through my phone, half expecting to see missed calls or weird notifications. Nothing stood out. It wasn't until that afternoon, when I was walking to the store in broad daylight, that I noticed something else. As I crossed the street, my shadow lagged behind me by a fraction of a second, just enough that I noticed. It caught up almost immediately, snapping back into place so fast I could have convinced myself it hadn't happened at all. But the feeling stuck with me, like a splinter I couldn't dig out. I still walk that route. I don't really have a choice. Nothing like that has happened again, not exactly. But sometimes, when it's late and quiet and the streetlights buzz just a little too loud, I pay close attention to where my shadow falls. And every once in a while, for just a moment, it feels like the light overhead is deciding whether to follow me or not. I woke up because my wrist was buzzing, not the alarm kind, just the soft vibration my watch used when it logged something. My eyes were still half closed when I rolled over and checked it. The screen showed activity, not steps, not heart rate spikes, movement. 6 minutes of it, right around 2:17 a.m. I lay there trying to make sense of that, staring at the ceiling fan. I lived alone in a small rental on the edge of town, a quiet suburban stretch that backed up to a tree line and then nothing but fields. I was a light sleeper. I knew when I rolled over, I knew when I got up to use the bathroom. I didn't remember moving at all. I told myself it was a glitch. The watch was old. I'd had it through 2 phones and 1 cracked screen. I put my arm back down and tried to go back to sleep, but the room felt wrong. Not cold or hot, just thin, like the air wasn't settled. That was when I noticed the light. It wasn't coming through the window the way streetlights did. It was higher, more spread out, like the sky itself was glowing. I sat up and looked toward the curtains. They were closed, but the fabric had a pale sheen to it, almost silvery. I reached out and touched it. The fabric was warm, not sun warm, more like it had been under a lamp. I pulled the curtain back an inch. Outside, the sky was bright, not daylight, not moonlight. The moon wasn't even up. It was this flat, even glow, like the color had been turned up without adding shadows. The trees at the back of the yard were dark cutouts against it. I checked the clock on my phone. Still 2:24 a.m. I stood there for a long time, just holding the curtain. The neighborhood was silent. No cars, no distant highway noise, no insects. I realized then I couldn't hear the usual hum from the power lines either. It was like someone had muted the background. My watch vibrated again. Another movement log. I hadn't moved. That scared me enough to fully wake up. I stepped back from the window and turned on the bedroom light. The glow outside didn't change. It didn't dim or brighten in response. It just stayed there. I walked into the hallway and checked the front door. Locked. Deadbolt still set. I checked the back door too. Same. I hadn't gone outside. There was no mud on the floor, no grass tracked in. My shoes were by the door where I always left them. When I came back into the bedroom, the glow outside was already fading. It didn't fade like a light turning off. It pulled upward, like a fog lifting straight into the sky. In less than 5 seconds, it was gone. The night snapped back to normal darkness, stars sharp again, the usual faint orange from the streetlight down the block. Sound came back all at once. A car passed somewhere far away. I heard a dog bark. The house settled. I stood there until my legs got tired. The next morning, I felt off in that hollow way you get after a bad dream you can't quite remember. My watch still showed the movement. 6 minutes. No map, no steps, just activity. I checked my phone's location history. It showed me at home all night. No blips, no gaps. I went to work anyway. I worked mornings at a hardware store on the edge of town. I told my coworker Ben about the light while we unloaded a truck. He laughed and said it sounded like a transformer blowing. I asked if there'd been a power outage. He shook his head. Nothing on my street, he said. That night I didn't wear the watch. I set it on the kitchen counter and went to bed early, lights off, curtains open this time. I wanted to see it if it happened again. I woke up to the same thin feeling in the air. This time I was sure I hadn't moved. I was on my back, hands on my chest. The sky was glowing again, brighter than before. I could see the outline of my room without turning on the light. The ceiling looked wrong, like the corners were farther away than they should have been. I sat up slowly. Nothing reacted to me. The glow didn't flicker, it didn't pulse, it just was. I glanced at the counter in the kitchen. The watch screen was lit. From the bedroom doorway, I could see it vibrating, just slightly, like it was being nudged. I didn't go near it. Instead, I walked to the front window and pulled the curtain aside. The whole neighborhood was bathed in that same dull brightness. Every house looked empty. No porch lights, no TVs, no movement. The sky didn't have a source. No beam, no shape, just light. I felt watched then. Not in a dramatic way, more like the sense you get when you realize you've been talking out loud and someone else is in the room. I scanned the sky. Stars were still there, but fewer, like someone had erased patches. My phone buzzed in my hand, a notification from the watch. More movement. I backed away from the window and sat on the couch, heart pounding, waiting for something to happen. Nothing did. No footsteps, no sounds. The glow stayed for maybe a minute, maybe longer. Time felt slippery. Then it lifted again, straight up. The sky darkened. Sound returned. I checked the time. It was 2:36 a.m. In the morning, the watch log showed 12 minutes of movement. 2 separate blocks. I took it off and left it in a drawer. That was 3 weeks ago. It hasn't happened every night. Just enough that I don't sleep well anymore. Sometimes the sky looks a little too bright when I wake up. Sometimes my watch logs a minute or two, even though I haven't worn it since. I still live there. I still lock my doors. I still wake up around the same time most nights. Nothing's ever been out of place. Nothing's ever been broken. I just don't trust the dark anymore. The headlights caught it for less than a second. Just a flash, like when you hit a reflective road sign at the wrong angle. Except there was no sign there. It was suspended above the right lane, maybe 15 feet up, and it shone back at me like brushed metal before the dark swallowed it again. I hit the brakes without really deciding to. My coffee sloshed out of the cup holder and onto the passenger seat. The car slowed, tires humming, and I leaned forward, squinting through the windshield like that would help. The road ahead was empty, flat, familiar. I was driving home from my sister's place outside of Lubbock, taking the same 2-lane highway I'd taken 100 times. It was late, but not crazy late, just after 11. The heat hadn't let up, even though the sun had been down for hours. My dashboard said 92 degrees. The air outside looked thick, like it always did out there, a kind of soft darkness that never really cooled. I told myself it had to be something dumb. A piece of debris hanging from a power line, a balloon, a trick of glare off my windshield. But I knew what glare looked like. This had shape, a curve to it. Smooth. I rolled to a stop where I thought I'd seen it, hazard lights clicking. I got out of the car, the night pressing in on me immediately. Crickets were loud in the grass. The smell of dust and warm asphalt filled my nose. There was nothing above the road. No wires. No branches. No drone. No blinking lights. No sound at all. I stood there longer than I meant to, neck craned, waiting for something to move. Nothing did. I laughed once, short and a little too loud, and got back in the car. For the next 10 miles, I drove slower than usual. Every time my headlights swept over a road sign or fence post, my chest tightened. I kept glancing up, half expecting to see that metallic curve again, hanging patiently in the dark. I didn't. What I did notice was my radio. I'd left it on low, some late-night talk show fading in and out between stations. About 5 minutes after I started driving again, the voices thinned into static. Not the harsh kind, just a soft hiss like air leaking from a tire. I reached for the knob and turned it. The static stayed exactly the same, no louder, no quieter. Then there was a tone underneath it. Low, steady. Not loud enough to be annoying, like just enough that I couldn't not hear it. I turned the radio off. The tone stayed. I checked the vents, thinking maybe something was wrong with the fan. I turned the AC off, rolled the windows down. The tone was still there, now mixed with the rush of hot air. It felt like pressure more than sound, like when you drive up a hill too fast and your ears haven't caught up yet. I swallowed and kept driving. That was when the headlights caught something again. This time it was farther off the road, hovering above a fallow field to my left. Just a quick reflection, gone before I could really focus on it. I eased off the gas instead of braking this time, heart pounding, eyes flicking between the road and the empty sky. Nothing appeared. The tone faded. My ears rang softly, like they did after a concert. I made it home a few minutes later, pulling into my driveway with more relief than I wanted to admit. My house sat alone at the edge of town, a single-story place with a gravel drive and a dark yard stretching out behind it. No neighbors close enough to see porch lights or hear voices. Inside, everything felt normal. Too normal. The fridge hummed. The clock over the stove read 11:47. I poured the rest of my coffee down the sink and stood there for a while, listening. Nothing. I slept badly that night. Every time I drifted off, I saw that flash again, suspended in the dark. When I finally woke up, it was with the feeling that I'd missed something important, like forgetting why you walked into a room. The next morning, my car clock was 7 minutes fast. I stood there staring at it, thumb hovering over the button to reset it, trying to remember if it had always been like that. I couldn't. My phone said the correct time. My microwave did too. I reset the car clock and drove to work. For the rest of the week, nothing happened. No strange lights, no tones, no missing time. I told myself I'd been tired, dehydrated, overcaffeinated, pick one. Then Friday night came. I left work late again, the heat still clinging to everything, even though a thin layer of clouds had rolled in. The sky looked dull and heavy, like it was holding something back. I took the same highway home without really thinking about it. About halfway there, my headlights flashed over something metallic again. This time I didn't brake. I didn't even slow down. I just watched it slide across my field of view perfectly smooth, keeping pace with my car for a heartbeat before drifting higher and out of the beam. I felt that pressure in my ears again, stronger this time. The radio crackled to life on its own, static flooding the speakers. Above the road, just ahead of me, the darkness seemed to thin. Not brighten exactly. More like someone had stretched it, pulled it apart just enough that the headlights didn't behave the way they should. The light didn't scatter. It bent. I drove straight through it. There was no flash, no sound, no sudden jolt. Just the sensation of being slightly off, like when you miss a step on the stairs but don't fall. A mile down the road, everything went back to normal. I checked my mirrors. The sky behind me looked the same as always. I glanced at the clock. It was 12:26. I knew, without doing the math, that it should have been earlier. I drove the rest of the way home, gripping the steering wheel so hard my hands ached. When I pulled into the driveway, I sat there with the engine idling, staring at the dark yard. I half expected to see something hovering above the grass, reflecting my headlights back at me. There was nothing. Inside, the house was quiet. Too quiet. The fridge wasn't humming. The clock over the stove was dark. The power was out. I walked to the window and pushed the curtain aside. The sky had taken on a strange color, not quite gray, not quite silver, flat, like an old TV screen. It lasted maybe 5 seconds. Then the lights snapped back on. The fridge hummed. The clock reset itself to midnight. Outside, the sky was black again, clouds rolling slowly overhead. I stood there for a long time, curtain still in my hand, trying to decide if I'd imagined it. I still drive that road. I don't take it at night anymore if I can help it. When I do, I keep my headlights low and my radio off. Sometimes when I'm driving home just after sunset, I catch a brief flash of reflection in the corner of my eye. Always just out of focus. Always gone before I can be sure. I don't slow down anymore. The glow showed up before my alarm, before the birds, before anything that usually signals morning out there. I was sitting on the back steps of the cabin with a mug of coffee that was still too hot to drink, watching the line where the ocean met the sky. It was supposed to be another 40 minutes before sunrise. I'd checked when I woke up because I couldn't sleep and wanted to see if it was even worth going outside yet. At first, I thought my eyes were adjusting wrong. The horizon had this soft, pale brightness to it, like the start of dawn, but cleaner somehow. Not orange or pink. More like someone had turned up a dimmer switch behind the clouds. I remember looking down at my phone to double-check the time. 4:58 a.m., still dark out. When I looked back up, the glow was brighter, wide and even, stretching across the water. The surface of the ocean didn't reflect it the way it should have. No shimmer, no glittering line. The water stayed dark and flat, like the light wasn't really there. The air felt different, not colder or warmer, just heavier, like right before a storm rolls in. I swallowed and realized my ears felt a little plugged, the way they do when you're driving up a mountain too fast. I stood up without really deciding to. My coffee sloshed over the rim and burned my hand, but I barely noticed. The glow started to move. That's the only word that fits. It didn't spread or fade. It pulled upwards slowly, like someone lifting a curtain from the horizon straight into the sky. The shape stayed smooth, no edges, no beam. Just a broad sheet of light sliding up and away. There was no sound, no wind. The waves didn't change. The glow lifted higher, thinning as it went, and then it was just gone. Not faded out, gone. The sky snapped back to full night, darker than it had been before, like my eyes had been tricked into thinking it was brighter than it ever was. I stood there for a long time after that, waiting for something else to happen. My ears rang faintly. The pressure feeling eased slowly, like letting air out of a balloon. I told myself it had been clouds or fog. Coastal fog does weird things with light. I'd heard that 100 times. I even laughed out loud, which sounded wrong in the quiet. Too loud. The cabin belonged to my friend Mark's uncle, and it sat alone on a rocky stretch of coast about an hour from the nearest town. No streetlights, no neighbors, no cell service unless you stood in one specific spot near the road. I'd come out alone for a few days to clear my head after a rough breakup. That was the plan anyway. I didn't sleep after that. When the real sunrise finally came, it looked normal. Warm colors, reflections on the water, birds starting up like nothing strange had happened. I felt stupid for how tense I was, jumping at every sound. Later that morning, I walked down to the beach to see if anyone else had been around. No footprints but mine. No boats offshore, nothing. I tried texting Mark once I got a signal. I typed out a whole explanation, deleted it, then sent something vague about weird light over the ocean. He replied with a joke about UFOs and told me to stop watching horror stuff alone at night. I didn't push it. The second thing happened that night. I was inside, reading on the couch with a lamp on. The windows faced the water, and I kept catching myself glancing at them. Around 11, the light flickered, just once. Then again, longer. The lamp dimmed like the power was about to go out, then steadied. I checked the breaker panel, everything was fine. The fridge hummed along, my phone was charging normally. A few minutes later, the cabin felt wrong. That's the best I can do. Like the space inside it had shifted slightly. My skin prickled, especially along my arms and neck. I held my breath without meaning to. Then I felt it again. That pressure, not painful, just deep, like being underwater without the cold. My ears rang louder this time. I stepped outside, heart hammering, barefoot on the cold wood of the porch. The sky was clear, stars sharp and bright, except there were fewer than there should have been. I couldn't say which ones were missing, only that whole patches felt emptier than they should have. I tilted my head back, scanning slowly, and that's when I noticed the light. The light. It was high up, almost straight overhead, dim and colorless, not blinking. It didn't move until I shifted my weight. When I took a step forward, it slid across the sky at the same pace, keeping its position relative to me. I stopped. It stopped. I tested it again, stepping back. It followed, smooth, no acceleration, no lag. My mouth went dry. I didn't feel like I was being chased. It felt more like being matched. Observed without urgency. I whispered, hello, like an idiot. My voice sounded too small. The light stayed there for another few seconds, then drifted sideways and vanished into the dark, blending in so perfectly I couldn't tell where it had gone. The pressure released all at once. I staggered a little, dizzy, and grabbed the porch railing. The stars looked normal again. Too normal. I went inside, locked the door, and slept with all the lights on. The next morning, I found sand on the porch, not blown in by wind. Clear footprints, barefoot, leading from the steps toward the edge of the porch and back again. They were my size. I checked my phone. There was a gap in my step counter from the night before. Just over 7 minutes of movement recorded between 11:42 and 11:49 p.m. I had no memory of that. I left the cabin early that day. Packed too fast, forgot things. As I drove away, I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see that pale glow lifting up from the ocean again. It never did. But sometimes, just before dawn, when the sky should still be dark, I wake up with that same pressure in my ears and the sense that the horizon is brighter than it should be. The clicking started when I was halfway down the trail, just past the last house where the gravel road turned into dirt. It was late, maybe around 10:30. I'd gotten home from work restless, the kind where sitting still makes your skin feel tight. The weather was warm for early fall, clear sky, no wind. I figured a short walk wouldn't hurt. I'd done it 100 times. Same loop through the trees, out by the old utility easement, then back toward the neighborhood. The first click sounded like someone snapping their tongue once. I stopped walking without really thinking about it, head tilted. Everything else was normal. Crickets, distant traffic, my own breathing. No more clicking. I shrugged it off and kept going. A few steps later, it came back. Soft, quick, not loud. Click, click, click. It didn't sound close enough to be right next to me, but it also didn't feel far away. It was like it existed somewhere just outside where I could point to. I stopped again. Silence. I actually laughed, a short, nervous one, and said out loud, "Okay," like that explained it. I told myself it was an insect, or something echoing weird through the trees. Sound does strange things at night, I knew that. I walked again, slower this time. The clicking resumed almost immediately, but now it felt like it was moving. Not following behind me exactly, more like it was shifting around me. One click from the left, then another slightly ahead on the right. Never overlapping, never frantic, just patient. I stopped and looked up into the trees. The sound cut off so cleanly it was unsettling, like someone had flipped a switch. I stood there longer than I meant to, scanning the branches. The moon was bright enough that I could see leaves and empty sky between them. Nothing moved. No birds flushing, no squirrels scrambling. Even the crickets seemed quieter, like they were holding their breath. I told myself I was getting into my head. That happens when you walk alone at night. I checked my phone, 10:41. Still had signal, battery fine. I texted my friend Marcus something dumb like, "Night walks are creepy lol," and shoved the phone back into my pocket. As soon as I took another step, the clicking started again. This time it was closer. I felt it in my chest more than my ears, like a pressure change you notice before you hear thunder. The clicks weren't louder, just heavier. I stopped, looked up. Silence. I tried something then. I took one step forward, then froze mid-step. The clicking cut out instantly, like it had been waiting for that exact moment. I didn't like that. I backed up a step instead of moving forward. The clicking came back, almost curious. 2 clicks, then a pause, then one more. My skin prickled. I turned slowly in a circle, trying to pinpoint anything. Movement, shadows that didn't belong. The trail behind me looked normal. The path ahead disappeared into darker trees. Above me was just sky and branches. I started walking faster. The clicking kept pace, not rushing, not falling behind. It circled me, staying just far enough away that I couldn't place it. Every time I glanced up, it stopped. Every single time. The silence after each look was wrong somehow, too empty, like sound itself had been pulled away. My heart was pounding now, but I didn't want to run. Running felt like the wrong move, like it would turn this into something else. I focused on my steps, counted them in my head. 30 steps in, something changed. The clicking stopped, but not the way it had before. It didn't cut off clean, it faded like someone slowly closing a door. At the same time, the air around me felt different, thicker. My ears popped slightly, the way they do when you go up a mountain too fast. For a second, I felt off balance, like the ground had shifted under me by a few inches. I stopped walking again. Above the trees, something moved. It wasn't bright at first, just a faint dimness, like a patch of sky that didn't match the rest. It slid sideways between the clouds, smooth and steady. No blinking, no sound, just motion. As I stared, it brightened slightly, enough that I could tell it wasn't a star or plane. It was too low, too controlled. The clicking didn't come back, but I could feel it then. This low, vibrating sense in my chest, like standing near heavy machinery. I whispered, "What the hell?" without meaning to. The thing above shifted position, not closer, not farther, just adjusted. The pressure in my ears increased for a second, then dropped away. The light vanished. Not like it turned off, more like it slipped behind something that wasn't there. The forest sounds came back all at once. Crickets, leaves, a car horn, far off. I hadn't realized how quiet it had gotten until everything returned. I stood there shaking, staring at the empty sky. Nothing else happened. I didn't wait for it to start again. I turned around and walked back the way I came, fast but controlled, like if I moved too suddenly, I'd break some unspoken rule. I didn't hear the clicking again. I didn't look up. When I reached the gravel road, the streetlights felt painfully bright, normal in a way that almost made me dizzy. I checked my phone again, 10:58. I frowned. That didn't make sense. I hadn't been out that long. The loop usually took 20 minutes, maybe 25 if I dragged my feet. I tried to piece it together in my head, but everything after the clicking started felt blurry, like time had folded in on itself. When I got home, my hands were still shaking. I locked the door, checked the windows, then checked them again. I stood in my living room for a long time, listening. No clicking, no hum, just the house settling. I didn't sleep much that night. The next morning, Marcus texted back asking what I meant about the night walk. I stared at the message for a while before replying something vague. I didn't know how to explain it without sounding like I'd lost it. I went back to the trail a few days later during the afternoon. Same path, same trees. Everything looked normal. I stood where I thought it had happened and listened. Nothing. But sometimes now, when I'm outside at night and everything goes quiet all at once, I get this strong urge not to look up. Like whatever caused the clicking is still there, waiting for me to notice it again. I was sitting on the back steps with a mug of coffee that had already gone cold, staring at the yard because I couldn't sleep. It was late, close to midnight, and the air had that heavy summer feel where everything seemed thick and still. No wind, no insects. Even the road behind the house was quiet, which was unusual. Someone was always driving through, even at night. I leaned back against the siding and closed my eyes for a second, mostly just listening. That was when the pressure hit. It wasn't painful. It was more like the feeling you get when you dive a little too fast into a pool and your ears don't pop right away. My chest felt tight, like the air around me had suddenly gotten heavier. It only lasted a second, maybe two, but it was strong enough that I opened my eyes and took a sharp breath without meaning to. The yard looked the same. The maple tree at the fence line. The shed, the grass glowing faintly under the porch light. But everything felt off, like the sound had been turned down. I realized my ears were ringing, a soft high note that hadn't been there before. I stood up and stepped off the porch, expecting the feeling to pass. Instead, the pressure eased all at once, like something letting go. I almost stumbled forward because my body had been bracing against it without me realizing. That's when I noticed the sky. There was a break in the clouds directly overhead, a long, uneven gap where the stars should have been bright. Instead, they looked dim, like someone had smeared grease over the lens. A faint light slid through the opening, not fast, not slow, just steady. It wasn't blinking. It wasn't sharp like a plane. It was soft and dull, the color of old aluminum. I followed it without thinking, craning my neck as it moved between the clouds. As it passed over the yard, that pressure came back for a split second. Not as strong as before, but enough that my ears rang again. The light didn't shine down. It didn't cast shadows. It just moved, silent, and then slipped behind the clouds and vanished. The sky went back to normal. The stars snapped into focus so suddenly it felt wrong, like someone had adjusted a dial. I stood there longer than I should have, waiting for something else to happen. Nothing did. No sound, no movement, just the porch light buzzing faintly behind me. I went inside and locked the door, even though I didn't know why. I checked my phone. No alerts, no missed calls. The time was normal. I told myself it had been some kind of atmospheric thing and went to bed, though I left the blinds open without realizing it. The next morning, my neighbor Rick asked if I'd been out late. He said his dogs had started barking all at once around midnight and then stopped just as suddenly. I told him I hadn't heard anything. That wasn't a lie. I hadn't. Over the next few nights, little things kept happening. The pressure came back once while I was brushing my teeth, just enough to make the mirror vibrate slightly. Another time, my ears rang while I was driving, even though the radio was off and the windows were closed. Each time it stopped as abruptly as it started. I started sitting outside again at night, partly because I couldn't sleep and partly because I wanted to see if it would happen again. I didn't tell anyone. It felt stupid even thinking about it, like I'd imagined the whole thing. A week later, it happened again. I was in the yard, sitting on the same steps, watching clouds drift across the moon. The air felt heavy, like before a storm, but the forecast was clear. When the pressure hit this time, it was stronger. My ears rang so sharply I had to cover them. My chest tightened, and for a second I had the irrational thought that I was about to pass out. Then it lifted. Above me, a dim light slid sideways through the clouds, not following any straight path. It curved slightly, like it was adjusting itself. I realized my hands were shaking. I hadn't heard it arrive. I hadn't heard anything leave. I tried to film it, fumbling with my phone, but by the time the camera app opened, the light was gone. The clouds closed over the gap like nothing had been there. I checked the video anyway. It showed my porch, my yard, and the clouds. Halfway through the clip, the image warped slightly, like heat distortion, and the audio dropped out for a fraction of a second. No light, just silence. After that, the pressure stopped happening as often, but the nights felt wrong, too bright, too still. Sometimes I'd sit up in bed with my ears ringing, convinced something had passed overhead. I never saw anything from inside the house, but I started keeping the blinds closed. I still go outside sometimes, but not for long. The yard feels smaller at night now, like it's being watched from somewhere higher up. Nothing has happened in weeks. No lights, no pressure, no ringing. But every now and then, when the clouds are low and the air feels thick, I get that underwater feeling again, just for a heartbeat. And when I look up, I catch myself counting the stars, trying to figure out which ones don't look right. I had been sitting on the back steps for a while, just killing time before bed. It was late enough that the neighborhood was quiet, but not so late that it felt creepy. The air was cool, dry, and still, the kind of night where sound carries farther than it should. I remember checking my phone and seeing it was a little after midnight. I'd been meaning to go inside, but the sky was clear and I got distracted. There was one star I kept looking at without really meaning to. It was brighter than most of the others, not flashing like a plane, just steady. I'd been zoning out, elbows on my knees, thinking about work stuff, half listening to the hum from the highway a few miles away. Nothing felt off at first. After a while, I noticed how quiet it had gotten. Even the distant traffic noise had faded, like someone slowly turning down a volume knob. No insects either, which I didn't really register until later. At the time, it just felt calm, heavy almost, like the air had weight to it. I was staring at that same bright star when it moved. Not fast, not sudden. It just slid to the left, smooth and controlled, like it was being dragged across glass. My brain immediately tried to make it into something normal. A plane turning. A satellite. But it didn't blink or change brightness. It didn't arc or curve. It just moved sideways, stopped for half a second, then kept going. I remember whispering "what the hell" out loud, even though no one was around. The sound of my own voice felt too loud. When the light stopped again, it dimmed slightly, just enough that I had to focus harder to keep track of it. Then it blended into the rest of the sky. 1 second it was distinct, the next it wasn't. I couldn't tell where it ended and the background stars began. I kept staring at the spot, trying to retrace it. My eyes felt dry, strained. I blinked hard, convinced I'd just lost it. But the longer I looked, the more I realized I couldn't tell which point had been the one I was watching. The pattern was broken somehow, like a missing puzzle piece I couldn't point to. That's when I noticed the pressure. It felt like when you change elevation too fast, like driving up a mountain or diving into a pool. Not painful, just uncomfortable. My ears didn't pop, but my head felt tight, like something was pressing down from above. I stood up suddenly uneasy, and that was when I realized I'd been sitting there longer than I thought. My phone said 1:47 a.m. That didn't make sense. I could have sworn it had been just after midnight when I checked it last. I hadn't been doing anything. I hadn't fallen asleep. I was sitting on concrete steps. I even checked my screen time, like that would explain it. There was a gap. No activity, no notifications, nothing. I started to feel stupid, like I was working myself up over nothing. I went inside, locked the door, and stood in the kitchen for a minute just listening. The house sounded normal. Fridge humming, the faint tick of the wall clock. My dog, Milo, was curled up in his bed by the couch. He lifted his head when he saw me, but didn't get up. That was weird on its own. He usually followed me everywhere. I scratched his ears and he leaned into my hand, but his body was tense, not shaking, just alert. His eyes kept flicking toward the sliding glass door. I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I started to drift off, I felt that same pressure again, like something passing overhead. No sound, just that heavy feeling. At one point, I got up and checked the backyard. Nothing. The sky looked normal, stars where they should be. The next morning, I noticed dirt on my shoes. I hadn't gone anywhere. I keep them by the door, and they'd been cleaned the day before. It wasn't mud, just dry soil like from the edge of the yard near the trees. I tried to tell myself I'd stepped outside without remembering, but that explanation didn't sit right. Over the next few days, little things kept happening. Lights dimming for a split second, then returning to normal. My phone battery draining faster than usual. Once, while I was brushing my teeth, I felt that pressure again and the bathroom light flickered. It was gone before I could even react. I went back outside every night after that, half hoping to see something again, half terrified that I would. I never saw the light move like that again, but the sky never felt the same. I caught myself scanning it without meaning to, tracking stars, checking if they stayed where they were supposed to. About a week later, I was out there again, leaning against the railing, when I realized something else. The same star I'd been watching before was back. Same brightness, same position. Or at least I thought it was the same one. I couldn't be sure. That was the problem. I couldn't tell if it had ever really been gone. I stood there for a long time waiting for it to move. It didn't. The night sounds slowly returned around me. Crickets. A car passing somewhere far off. The pressure never came back. Eventually, I went inside, locked the door, and checked the time. It was exactly what I expected it to be. I still sit out there sometimes. I don't watch that part of the sky as much anymore, but I notice when it's clear. I notice when the stars feel too sharp, too still. Every now and then, I catch myself wondering if it stopped being a star long before it moved, and I just didn't notice until it was already gone. I was already halfway down Maple Ridge when I noticed the light. It was close to midnight, the kind of late where the neighborhood felt abandoned, but not asleep. Porch lights were off, windows dark, no traffic. I'd gone out for a walk because I couldn't focus at home. Too much noise in my head, not enough anywhere else. That stretch of road curved along a line of trees and empty lots, and I'd walked it enough times that my body knew it without thinking. I looked up because the sky felt brighter than it should have been. At first, it looked like a star slipping out from behind a cloud. One steady white point, not blinking, not pulsing. I didn't stop walking. I barely registered it. Planes crossed over all the time, and satellites were easy to spot if you paid attention. But something about it felt off. It was low. Lower than a satellite, but higher than any drone I'd seen, and it wasn't moving the way planes did. No straight line speed, no gradual fade. It was drifting. I slowed my pace without meaning to. The light slowed too. That got my attention. I stopped walking. The light stopped. Not faded, not dimmed, just paused. Suspended in the same spot above the trees like it had hit an invisible wall. I stood there with my hands in my jacket pockets, staring up. My first thought was that it was coincidence, perspective, some trick of depth and motion. Your brain loved doing that when it was tired. I took one step forward. The light moved, same direction, same speed. I stopped again. It stopped. A weird pressure settled in my chest like the air had thickened. Everything around me felt too still. No wind in the leaves, no insects. Even the distant highway noise seemed muted. I laughed quietly, more out of nerves than humor, and started walking again, deliberately this time. Faster. The light matched me perfectly. I slowed to a crawl. It slowed. I turned around and walked the other way. The light changed direction instantly, gliding back across the sky to stay aligned with me. That's when my stomach dropped. I wasn't being followed exactly. It didn't feel like something chasing me. It felt like something was anchored to my position. Like I was the thing moving and it was adjusting around me. I stopped in the middle of the sidewalk and craned my neck back until it hurt. The light waited. I checked my phone. No notifications. Signal was there, but the compass app spun for a second before settling in the wrong direction. I locked the screen and slipped it back into my pocket without trying to take a photo. I didn't want to break whatever weird balance had formed. I started walking again toward home this time. The light came with me. Every step I took, it slid across the sky. When I paused to retie my shoe, it froze. When I leaned forward, it shifted forward. When I stepped back, it adjusted backward. At one point, I crossed under a streetlight, and the glare forced me to look down. When I glanced back up, the light was still there, exactly where it should have been. The realization crept in slowly and made my skin prickle. It wasn't reacting to where I was. It was reacting to when I moved. I tested it. I took one step forward and stopped mid-stride, freezing with my foot hovering an inch above the ground. The light moved during that half step and then halted when I did. I felt suddenly exposed, like I'd stepped into a spotlight without realizing it. I kept going. The closer I got to my street, the more wrong everything felt. Houses I knew well looked flat and unfamiliar, like sets built too quickly. My footsteps sounded delayed, like the sound wasn't syncing up right. I stopped again, right at the corner. The light stopped. I stayed there longer this time. 30 seconds. A minute. Nothing changed. I whispered, "Okay," to nobody. When I started walking again, the light followed like it had been waiting. I made it to my driveway and stood there, staring up at the patch of sky above my neighbor's roof where the light hovered. My hands were shaking. I didn't know what I expected it to do next, but I couldn't bring myself to go inside yet. I took one step backward. The light slid backward. I took 2 steps forward. It followed. I felt stupid, standing there playing this silent game with something I didn't understand, but I couldn't stop. I needed to know where the boundary was. I turned and walked up the driveway. The lights stayed aligned until the roof blocked my view. I went inside and locked the door, leaning my forehead against it for a second. The house felt hollow, like it had been waiting too. I didn't sleep much that night. The next evening I told myself it had been stress, fatigue, my brain misfiring. I almost didn't go out, but the urge to check was stronger than the fear. I took the same route, same time, same weather. Nothing happened for the first 10 minutes. Then, just past the park, the light appeared again. Same brightness, same height. I stopped immediately. It stopped. There was no denying it anymore. I walked. It moved. I stopped. It froze. This time I stayed out longer. I walked in loops, doubled back, paused at random intervals. Each time, the light responded perfectly, like it was tied to some invisible marker above my head. I sped up to a jog. It kept pace. I slowed to a near standstill. It slowed too. It never drifted ahead, never lagged behind, never overshot. It felt less like it was watching me and more like it was tracking a variable, like movement itself was the trigger. At one point, I stood completely still for so long my legs started to ache. The light hung there, unwavering. I felt an overwhelming sense of being observed, not in a personal way, but in the way a machine observes data. Neutral, detached, precise. I went home again. Same ending. As soon as I stepped inside, the light vanished. The third time it happened, something changed. I stopped walking in the middle of the street and didn't move for a long time. Cars didn't pass. Windows stayed dark. After maybe a minute, the light shifted, just slightly. It drifted sideways on its own, breaking the pattern for the first time. My heart jumped. It moved a little farther, then stopped, like it had decided to disengage. I didn't move. I barely breathed. After a few seconds, it slid away toward the horizon and faded into the clouds. I stood there long after it was gone. I still go on late walks. I don't know why. Habit, maybe, or waiting. Sometimes I stop for no reason at all and stand perfectly still, listening to the quiet, watching the sky. When I do, I get this strange feeling, like I'm being measured again. So far, nothing has come back. I sat on the old wooden bench near the boat ramp because my legs were tired and the lake was calm in a way that felt earned. It was late evening, that soft stretch before full dark when the air cooled off, but the bugs hadn't completely committed yet. I had walked the trail around the north side after work, same loop I'd done 100 times. Same water, same reeds, same smell of damp leaves and algae. Nothing about the night felt special. I tossed a pebble into the water and watched the ripples spread until they disappeared. The surface was mostly smooth, reflecting the dim orange band of sky and a few early stars. I leaned back and checked my phone, saw I had no new messages, and put it face down beside me. That was when I noticed the light in the water. At first, I thought it was just a reflection from behind me, maybe a car on the road above the trees. But it wasn't jittery or broken like reflections usually are. It was clean. A single soft glow, pale and white, moving slowly under the surface like something dragging a flashlight through the lake. I leaned forward, elbows on my knees, staring straight down at it. The water didn't ripple around it. No bubbles, no disturbance at all. The light slid in a straight line, steady and unhurried, about 20 feet out from shore. I looked up to check the sky. There was nothing there. No drone, no plane, no helicopter. The clouds were thin and high, drifting east. The tree line on the opposite shore was dark and still. I turned back to the water, expecting the light to be gone. It wasn't. It kept moving, same speed, same brightness. I stood up slowly, my knee popping louder than I wanted, and stepped closer to the edge. Gravel crunched under my shoe. Still no reaction from the lake. The glow didn't change direction or fade. It didn't even seem to notice me. I remember thinking how wrong it felt that there was no reflection above it. The water was acting like a window instead of a mirror. I pulled my phone up and opened the camera. The screen showed the lake just fine, dark and grainy. The glow was there too, clear as anything. I didn't zoom. I didn't want to mess it up. I just held the phone steady and let it record. The light stopped. It didn't slow down, it just stopped. Dead still, directly in front of me. I stood there with my arm out, phone humming faintly in my hand, and waited. I don't know what I expected. A splash, a surge upward, something dramatic. Instead, the glow dimmed slightly, like someone turning a dial a fraction of an inch, and then continued on its path as if nothing had happened. That was the first moment I felt watched. Not from the water, from everywhere else. The woods behind me were suddenly too quiet. The insects had gone patchy, buzzing in short bursts instead of their steady chorus. I turned in a slow circle, scanning the trail, the trees, the parking lot beyond the hill. Everything looked normal, empty. When I turned back, the glow had moved farther out, deeper into the lake, where the water darkened into something you couldn't see the bottom of during the day. The light kept going anyway, slipping into that darkness without getting weaker. My phone vibrated once. Not a notification, just a single buzz, like it had lost and regained signal. The recording timer on the screen jumped forward by several seconds. I hadn't moved. I checked the time. It was later than it should have been. Not by hours, just enough to make me frown and do the math twice. The light vanished without drama, no flare, no fade. One frame it was there, the next it wasn't. The lake went back to being a lake. Reflections returned. The water looked shallow again. I stood there for a long time after that, listening to the bugs slowly find their rhythm again. My hands felt cold even though the air wasn't. When I finally sat back down, my legs were shaky in a way that felt delayed, like my body was catching up to something my head hadn't processed yet. I watched the water until it was too dark to see anything at all. On the walk home, every sound made me turn. A deer crashing through brush nearly sent me out of my skin. When I reached my yard, I stopped and looked up at the sky, half expecting to see something hovering there, mirrored and quiet. Nothing was. Inside, I plugged my phone in and watched the video. The footage showed exactly what I remembered. The glow, the stop, the movement. But there was a stretch in the middle where the image warped slightly, like heat distortion, even though it was a cool night and the phone had been steady in my hand. The timestamp jumped there too. I watched it 3 times, then locked the phone and set it face down on the counter. I didn't delete it. I didn't send it to anyone. I just stood in the kitchen, listening to the fridge hum and the house settle. Later, lying in bed, I kept thinking about how the light moved in a straight line, unconcerned with depth or distance or anything that should have mattered. How it felt less like something passing through the lake and more like the lake had briefly revealed something that was already there. At some point, I fell asleep. The next morning, I woke up with the sense that I had dreamed the whole thing. The daylight made it feel smaller, easier to dismiss. On my way to work, I drove past the lake and glanced over out of habit. The water was calm, empty, normal. But as I rounded the bend, I noticed the surface brighten for just a second, like something far below had shifted position. Then it was gone. I was sitting on the back steps because I couldn't sleep, just letting the night burn itself out. It was late enough that the houses behind mine were dark, and the only light came from the neighbor's porch 2 doors down and the thin glow from the street at the end of the block. It had been hot all day, one of those muggy late summer days where the air doesn't really cool off at night, just gets quieter. I remember checking my phone and seeing it was 1:47 a.m. I'd been doom scrolling for a while, then set it face down on the step because the screen felt too bright. The yard was still. No wind, no bugs, which I noticed only because it felt odd. Usually there's at least some chirping, even if it's faint. That's when the pressure hit. It wasn't painful. It wasn't even dramatic. It felt exactly like the moment when you dive underwater in a pool and your ears haven't caught up yet. A soft, squeezing fullness, like the air suddenly got heavier. I swallowed automatically, like you do on an airplane, and for half a second I honestly thought maybe a storm was rolling in fast. But the sky was clear. I stood up because my balance felt slightly off, like I'd gotten up too fast. The pressure lasted maybe a second, maybe two, long enough for me to notice it wasn't normal. Then it eased, but the air didn't feel the same afterward. It felt thin, almost hollow, like the space around me had been scooped out a little. I remember saying, "What the hell," out loud, quietly, like I didn't want to wake anyone up. That's when I saw the light. It wasn't bright. That's important. It wasn't a beam or a flash or anything that lit things up. It was more like a dull glow, the color of an LED that's dying. Pale, almost grayish, moving behind the clouds that weren't there a second earlier. I realized then that there were clouds, but they were high and thin, like smudges rather than shapes. The light slid sideways between two of those smudges. Smooth, no blinking, no sound. It moved at a steady pace that didn't feel fast or slow, just deliberate. I tracked it without really meaning to, my head turning as it went. I tried to tell myself it was a plane, then I tried helicopter, then drone. None of those fit. It didn't blink, it didn't wobble, and it didn't make any noise at all. Was that not even the faint hum you sometimes hear, if the neighborhood is quiet enough? The pressure came back for just a moment as the light passed overhead. Stronger this time. My ears rang softly, like when you've been somewhere loud and step into silence too fast. The light slid behind a darker patch of cloud and vanished. Not faded, not sped up, just gone. The night snapped back into place like nothing had happened. The crickets started up again all at once, like someone had flipped a switch. A breeze brushed the leaves in the yard, light and normal. I realized my hands were clenched so hard my nails had left marks in my palms. I stood there for a long time, staring at the sky, waiting for something else to happen. Nothing did. I went back inside and locked the door, even though I knew how ridiculous that was. I checked the windows. I checked the back door again. Everything was normal. The house smelled the same. The fridge hummed. The clock on the microwave still read 1:47, which I thought was weird. But when I checked my phone, it said 1:49, so I chalked it up to the clock being slow. I barely slept that night. Every time I drifted off, I felt like the air in the room was shifting, even though it wasn't. When morning finally came, it felt too bright, like the contrast had been turned up. I tried to forget about it. That lasted about a day. The next night, around the same time, I felt it again while brushing my teeth. Just a soft pressure change, quick and gone. I froze with toothpaste foam in my mouth, staring at myself in the mirror, waiting. Nothing followed at that time. The third night, my phone battery dropped from 40% to 12 in the span of a few minutes while it sat untouched on the coffee table. I blamed the battery. Phones do that sometimes. Still, I charged it overnight even though it didn't really need it. On the fourth night, my neighbor Matt asked me if I'd been outside lately. We were both taking our trash out, standing by the curb under the streetlight. He looked tired. He works early mornings and usually doesn't chat. Why? I asked. He shrugged. Thought I saw someone standing in your yard the other night, just for a second, probably just shadows. I told him I'd been out there. I didn't tell him why. That night, I sat on the back steps again. I told myself I was being stupid, but part of me needed to see if it would happen again. The air was cooler this time. A thin layer of clouds covered most of the sky, muting the stars. Nothing happened for almost an hour. Then the pressure rolled through again, softer than before, but unmistakable. The hairs on my arms lifted. Above me, the clouds brightened just slightly. Not enough to cast light on the ground, just enough that I could see their edges more clearly. The dim glow slid between them again, slower this time. It paused, just for a moment, directly overhead. I had the overwhelming feeling of being noticed, not watched exactly, but acknowledged. Like when you make eye contact with someone across a room. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I almost jumped out of my skin. When I pulled it out, the screen was black, completely dead. It had been at 80% an hour earlier. The light moved again, slipping behind the clouds and disappearing. The pressure released, leaving my ears ringing faintly. The night sounds returned, but quieter this time, hesitant. I didn't sit outside again after that. For the next week, things stayed mostly normal except for small stuff. Electronics acting strange, my sleep tracker logging brief periods of movement in the middle of the night when I knew I hadn't gotten out of bed, the sky looking just a little too bright sometimes, like light pollution that didn't make sense. Nothing dramatic. Nothing I could point to and say, this is it. I still go outside at night sometimes, but I don't sit still anymore. I keep the porch light on. I don't look straight up for too long. Every now and then, when the air goes quiet and heavy for just a second, I feel that pressure again. And I wait, holding my breath, hoping the sky stays dark. I noticed it because the water didn't look right. I was sitting on a folding chair at the edge of the lake, boots off, socks rolled down, letting my feet dry in the cool air. It was late evening, just past sunset, that in-between time where the sky still held some color, but the woods had already started to darken. The lake was calm, almost flat, with only small ripples drifting toward shore. I'd come out alone after work. I live in a small town, and this lake sits about 15 minutes outside it, surrounded by state land. No houses right on the shore, no marina, no lights except a gravel lot with a single flickering lamp. It was a place people fished or drank beers or sat quietly when they didn't want to talk to anyone. That night it was quiet, no wind, no insects yet, just the occasional bird settling in somewhere behind me. I was scrolling through my phone, barely paying attention to the water, when I saw a pale glow under the surface, maybe 20 yards out. At first I thought it was just a reflection from the sky, some leftover light catching the angle wrong. Then it moved. The glow slid sideways, perfectly straight, like someone dragging a dim flashlight beam beneath the water. It didn't wobble or ripple. It didn't spread out. It stayed contained, a soft oval of light, gliding just under the surface. I lowered my phone without thinking and leaned forward. The water above the glow didn't react. No wake, no bubbles, no disturbance at all. It was like the light was passing through solid glass. I stood up slowly, heart starting to thump for no clear reason. My first thought was a submerged boat light or maybe some kind of underwater drone, but that didn't make sense here. This wasn't a recreational lake. No boats allowed with motors, and even if there were, the light was wrong. Too even, too muted. The glow continued its path, steady and unhurried, moving from left to right across the lake. I watched it pass through darker water, through faint reflections of trees, never changing shape. I remember saying out loud, "What the hell is that?" just to hear a voice. The glow reached a point roughly in front of me, maybe 10 yards offshore, and then it faded. Not abruptly. It dimmed like a light being lowered on a dial until there was nothing left. The water stayed calm. I waited for something to break the surface. A splash, a ripple, anything. Nothing happened. I stood there longer than I meant to, scanning the water, half expecting the glow to reappear somewhere else. It didn't. Eventually, I sat back down, trying to convince myself I'd imagined it. Maybe some weird bioluminescence. Maybe a trick of the light. I pulled out my phone again, Googled phrases like glowing lake water and underwater light moving straight line. The results were useless. A few minutes later, the insects started up. Crickets, then something buzzing near the reeds. The normal night sounds returned, and with them came that uneasy feeling that I'd missed something important. I packed up and left earlier than planned. The next night I came back. I told myself I just wanted to prove it was nothing, that I'd misseen something and needed closure. I brought a flashlight, a thermos of coffee, and my phone fully charged. It was darker when I arrived, clouds covering most of the sky. The lake looked like a sheet of black glass. I sat in the same spot as before and waited. Nothing happened for a long time. I almost gave up and started packing again when I noticed the glow, farther out this time. It appeared suddenly, like it had been switched on. maybe 40 yards from shore. My stomach dropped. The light moved again in that same straight, precise line. No hesitation. No variation. It cut across the lake as if following an invisible track. I stood up, my hands shaking enough that I noticed it. I pulled out my phone and started recording, holding it steady on the water. The glow didn't react. It didn't speed up or slow down. It didn't rise. It just kept moving. As it passed closer to shore, I realized something else that made my skin prickle. The glow wasn't illuminating anything. It didn't cast light onto the underside of the surface. It didn't brighten the water around it. It was visible, but it didn't light. Like it wasn't actually light at all. My phone buzzed, the screen briefly flickering. I glanced down for half a second. When I looked back up, the glow was gone. I checked the video immediately. The recording was there, but when I scrubbed through it, the water stayed dark the entire time. No glow, no movement, just black ripples and distant reflections. I stood there breathing hard, the phone heavy in my hand. Behind me, somewhere in the trees, a branch snapped. I spun around, flashlight up, heart racing. The beam caught trunks and leaves, nothing else, no footsteps, no voices. I left again. Over the next week, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I went back twice more, each time telling myself it was the last. Both times, the glow appeared. Different distances, same motion. Always straight, always silent, always gone before reaching the surface. Once, I thought I felt something through my feet, a faint vibration through the ground, like a heavy vehicle passing far away. Another time, my watch reset itself while I was standing there, jumping back exactly 3 minutes. I stopped trying to record it. The last night I went, the lake felt wrong even before anything happened. The air was too still. The insects hadn't started yet, even though it was well past dusk. The clouds hung low, dull, and heavy. The glow appeared closer than ever, maybe 10 yards out. It moved directly toward my position, not at me exactly, but parallel to the shore. As it passed in front of me, I noticed something new. The water above it wasn't reflecting the sky. Everywhere else, the surface showed faint cloud shapes, darker patches. Above the glow, the reflection was blank, empty, like a strip cut out of the lake. I took an involuntary step back. The glow slowed, just slightly, and for a moment I had the overwhelming sense that it was aware of me. Not watching, just accounting for me, like I was an obstacle on a route. Then it faded again, leaving the water unchanged. A few seconds later, the insects started up all at once, loud enough to make me flinch. I didn't stay. I haven't been back to the lake since. I drive past it sometimes and it looks normal, peaceful. Just water and trees and a quiet road. But now, whenever I'm near large bodies of water at night, I catch myself staring at the surface, waiting to see that soft, sliding glow beneath it. And sometimes when the water goes too still, I get the feeling that whatever it was is still moving, just deeper now, following paths I can't see. I was stopped at the red light on Hawthorne and 6th, the one by the old strip mall that never quite filled up again after the grocery store left. It was just after 7 p.m., early spring, still light out but flat looking, that in-between hour where everything feels muted. I remember because I just checked the clock on my dash and done the math on whether I had time to swing by my brother's place before heading home. I was sitting there with my foot on the brake, radio low, thinking about nothing in particular when the color drained out of everything. That's the only way I know how to describe it. The sky didn't go dark. It went dull, like someone turned the saturation knob all the way down. The blue flattened into this uniform gray, not stormy, not cloudy, just blank. The buildings, the cars, even the trees along the sidewalk all looked like they'd been photocopied. For half a second, I thought my eyes were doing something weird, like when you stand up too fast, then the light turned green. I realized I'd missed the change because the car behind me honked, short and annoyed. I looked down, then back up, and the color rushed back all at once. Blue sky, green trees, red brick, normal. I drove through the intersection on autopilot, heart thumping harder than it should have. I checked my mirrors. Everything looked fine. Traffic flowed the way it always did. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe glare, maybe fatigue. I worked IT support, spent too much time staring at screens. Eye strain made sense. Still, the rest of the drive felt off. Familiar streets felt slightly wrong. like the angles were different or the distances didn't line up the way my brain expected. I missed my turn once and had to loop back. When I got home, my brother Ethan texted asking if I was still coming over. I stared at the message longer than necessary before telling him I was too tired. That night, I dreamed about traffic lights. Not dramatic dreams, just standing at intersections, watching signals change, except every time the light switched, the world lost a little more color. By the end of the dream, everything was gray and silent, and I couldn't tell if the light was red or green anymore. I woke up before my alarm, unsettled but embarrassed by how much it stuck with me. The next few days were normal. I paid attention at lights without meaning to, checking the sky, watching reflections on car hoods. Nothing happened. By the end of the week, the memory had dulled enough that I could almost laugh at myself. Then, it happened again. Different intersection this time. Smaller. Residential. I was heading back from Ethan's place around 8:30, dusk settling in, streetlights just starting to come on. I stopped at a red light behind a white SUV. The moment my car came to a full stop, the world flattened. Same washed out gray. Same feeling of pressure, like the air had thickened slightly. I looked up immediately this time. The sky wasn't cloudy, it just wasn't colored. The streetlight above the intersection was on, but the light it cast looked wrong, dull and lifeless, like it was shining through fog that wasn't there. I looked down at the traffic signal. Red. I counted in my head. 1, 2. When I looked back up, the light was green. Color snapped back. The SUV ahead of me was already rolling forward. I hit the gas a second late, pulse racing. This time I knew I hadn't imagined it. At the next stop sign, I pulled over and put the car in park. I sat there with my hands on the wheel, breathing slowly, checking mirrors, checking the sky, waiting for something else to happen. Nothing did. When I got home, I wrote it down in my notes app. Just the facts. Time, location, what I saw. It felt stupid, but also necessary, like anchoring it to something real. Over the next month, it happened 4 more times. Always at a complete stop. Always brief. Always that same dull, drained gray. I never once saw the light change while the world was colorless. I only knew it had because it was green when the color came back. I started paying attention to the clock. The timestamps didn't line up. Once I was sure I'd only sat at the light for a few seconds. When I checked the dash clock afterward, 2 minutes had passed. Not enough to cause traffic to stack up. Not enough for anyone else to notice. Just enough to make my stomach drop. I tried to talk myself out of it. Microsleeps. Dissociation. Stress. I Googled symptoms and immediately closed the browser because everything sounded like a diagnosis I didn't want. I told Ethan eventually. We were sitting in his garage, beers open, door halfway up. He listened without interrupting, then said, "So, like, your brain blanks out?" "I don't blank out," I said. "I'm there the whole time. It's just muted." "Do you lose time?" "I don't feel like I do, but the clocks say I might." He frowned. "That's not great." He suggested I see a doctor. I said I would. I didn't. A few weeks later, something new happened. I was stopped at a light downtown, later than usual, close to 10 p.m. The street was mostly empty. When the gray washed over everything, I noticed something I hadn't before. The sky wasn't uniform. Directly above the intersection, there was a faint, darker shape, barely visible against the washed-out gray. Not solid, more like a smudge or a shadow cast onto the sky itself. It didn't move. I felt that pressure again, heavier now, like my chest was being gently pressed from the inside. My ears rang softly. I wanted to look away. I couldn't. When the color came back, the shape was gone. The light was green. I drove home shaking. After that, the feeling followed me even when I wasn't driving. Standing in line at the store, I'd get this sense of things thinning, like reality was about to lose its grip on color again. It never did, but the anticipation was almost worse. I started avoiding certain routes, certain intersections. I planned my drives obsessively. It didn't matter. The last time it happened, I wasn't alone. Ethan was in the passenger seat. We were heading back from a late movie, talking about something stupid. I slowed for a red light near the river. Mid-sentence, he stopped talking. The world went gray. "Do you see that?" he asked quietly. My heart slammed into my ribs. "You see it too?" "Everything looks flat," he said, like an old photo. I turned my head slowly. The darker patch in the sky was there again, more defined this time, hovering above the intersection like a stain. I watched the traffic light, red. I didn't blink. When color returned, Ethan sucked in a sharp breath. The light's green. How long were we stopped? I don't know, I said. My voice sounded far away. We drove the rest of the way in silence. At his place, he checked his phone. The lock screen clock showed 9:58 p.m. His messages said the last one he'd sent was at 9:54. I don't remember 4 minutes, he said. Neither did I. After that, it stopped. No more gray, no more pressure. Weeks passed, then months. Ethan stopped bringing it up. I stopped driving at night when I could avoid it. Sometimes, though, when I'm stopped at a light during the day, I swear the colors look a little too bright, like they're overcorrecting. And every now and then when the light turns green, I realize I don't remember it ever being red. The first thing I noticed was the shadow above the bookshelf moving when nothing else was. I was sitting on the couch with my feet up on the coffee table, half watching something I'd already seen, just letting the noise fill the room. It was late, a little after 11, and the house was quiet in that normal way it gets at night when the furnace kicks on and off and everything else settles. One lamp was on in the corner by the window. Warm light, nothing harsh. I glanced up because the line where the wall met the ceiling looked wrong. The shadow there, the soft, dark band that always sat in the same place, was sliding, slowly. Not flickering, not changing shape, just drifting, like someone was gently pulling it along the ceiling toward the hallway. I froze, remote loose in my hand. My first thought was headlights. A car passing by, light hitting the house at a weird angle. But my place sat back from the road, and there were trees between me and the street. Plus, the movement was steady. Too steady. I leaned forward and watched it for a few seconds. The shadow kept moving in the same direction, smooth and deliberate, like it had a destination. I stood up. The second I shifted my weight, I felt that tight, hollow feeling in my chest you get right before something bad happens. The shadow didn't react. It didn't speed up or stop. It just kept going. I walked to the light switch and flipped it on. The ceiling flooded with light, and the shadow snapped back into its normal place instantly, like nothing had happened. I stood there longer than I needed to, listening. The house sounded normal. No footsteps, no creaks out of place. The TV kept playing behind me. I turned the lamp off again. The shadow stayed still. I told myself it was my eyes, or fatigue, or the angle of the lamp. I sat back down, trying to shake the feeling that something had already happened and I'd missed it. About a minute later, the shadows started moving again. This time I could see it wasn't just one. The entire line along the ceiling was drifting together, every shadow sliding in the same direction toward the front of the house. It was subtle, but once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. I stood again, slower this time, careful not to make sudden movements. My skin prickled, like static. I walked to the window. The glass was cold against my fingertips as I pulled the curtain back a few inches. Outside, the neighborhood looked the same as always. Dark houses, a few porch lights, the street empty. But above the rooftops, just above the tree line, there was a faint light moving across the sky. It wasn't bright. It was barely there, like someone had smudged a pale gray glow across the stars and was slowly dragging it sideways. No blinking, no sound. It moved in a perfectly straight line. As it passed overhead, the shadows inside the house kept sliding in the same direction. I stepped back from the window, heart pounding, and looked up at the ceiling again. The shadows were still moving, still smooth, still unbroken. Then everything stopped. The light outside vanished without fading. The shadows froze where they were, then gently slid back to where they belonged, as if released. The silence afterward felt wrong, too complete, like the air had been muted. I stood there for a long time before I realized my jaw hurt from clenching it. I checked my phone. No alerts. No missed calls. The time read 11:24. I could have sworn it had been closer to 11:15 when I first noticed the shadow. I slept with all the lights on that night. The next day, nothing felt off. I went to work, talked to people. The world stayed where it was supposed to be. By the afternoon, the whole thing already felt unreal, like something I'd imagined while half asleep. That night, it happened again. Not the light, just the shadows. I was brushing my teeth when I noticed the line above the bathroom mirror shifting. Same direction, same speed. I didn't even finish brushing. I rinsed, turned on every light in the house, and sat on the couch until I fell asleep, sitting upright. The third night, I didn't see anything. The fourth night, I did. This time, I was ready. I left the lights low on purpose and sat in the living room with the curtains open. I didn't turn the TV on. I just waited. Around 11:30, the shadows started drifting. My heart started racing immediately, but I forced myself to stay still. I counted my breaths. 1, 2, 3. Outside, the faint light appeared again, sliding silently across the sky, same path as before. It was clearer this time, wider, close enough that the stars behind it dimmed slightly as it passed. The shadows followed it exactly. I felt pressure build in my ears like altitude change and a low vibration deep in my chest, more felt than heard. The house itself seemed to hum, just barely. I grabbed my phone and lifted it, pointing the camera at the ceiling. The moment the screen lit up, the vibration stopped. The shadows snapped back. Outside, the light vanished. My phone screen showed nothing but a normal ceiling. I checked the time, 11:47. 17 minutes gone. I didn't sit in the dark again after that. I started leaving lights on overnight, sleeping with the TV running, anything to keep shadows from forming. A week later, my neighbor Mark asked if I'd seen anything strange in the sky lately. He said his dog had been acting weird at night, staring up and whining at the same time every evening. I told him no. I didn't want to explain how the shadows in my house seemed to know where the light was before I did. I still live there. The shadows haven't moved like that again. Not yet. But sometimes late at night, when I'm sitting quietly and the room is dim, I swear I feel the light before it shows up, like a pressure shift or the sense of being slightly out of sync with everything else. When that happens, I don't look up anymore. I turn on every light I can reach and wait for the feeling to pass. The water lit up under my kayak without warning. I was halfway across the lake, maybe 50 yards from the nearest shore, drifting more than paddling at that point. It was late summer, just before full dark. The sky still held that washed-out blue-gray color, and the trees around the lake had started to blur into one dark ring. I liked being out at that time because everything slowed down. No jet skis, no kids yelling, just the sound of water against plastic and the occasional bird settling in for the night. I noticed the glow because it didn't reflect. At first, I thought it was just my eyes adjusting. Then I looked straight down and saw the water beneath me glowing a pale greenish white, like someone had turned on a dim light under the surface. Not bright, not dramatic, just enough to see the shape of my paddle blade and the underside of the kayak. The surface of the lake stayed dark, no shimmer, no ripple of light, nothing bouncing back up. It was like the glow stopped exactly at the waterline. I froze, paddle half lifted, and just stared. The glow stayed steady for maybe 5 seconds, long enough that I had time to think this isn't normal, and also long enough to notice what wasn't happening. The water wasn't warming. I couldn't hear anything. No bubbles, no movement from below. Then it faded out, like someone slowly turning a dimmer switch down. The lake went black again. I stayed still, listening. The usual sounds were still there. Crickets starting up along the shore. A frog somewhere to my left. The distant hum of a car on the county road. I told myself it had to be bioluminescence. That was the obvious answer. Except this was a freshwater lake in upstate New York, and I'd kayaked here for years without seeing anything like that. Also, bioluminescence usually reacts to movement. I hadn't moved. I dipped my paddle in gently and stirred the water. Nothing happened. I laughed quietly, more from nerves than humor, and told myself to head back. The light had messed with my sense of distance. The shoreline felt farther away than it had a minute earlier. As I paddled, I kept glancing down, half expecting the glow to come back. It didn't. When I reached the dock near the launch, my hands were shaking a little as I pulled the kayak up. I stood there for a minute, letting the last of the light fade from the sky. Everything looked normal again. I didn't tell anyone about it that night. I went back out the next evening. I told myself it was curiosity, but it was more than that. There was a sense of unfinished business, like I'd walked out of a room too early and missed something important. The lake looked the same, calm, darkening sky, no boats. I paddled out to roughly the same spot, judging by the alignment of 2 tall pines on the far shore and the low hill to the right. I drifted and waited. Nothing happened. I stayed out longer than usual until the sky was almost fully dark. Still nothing. I finally headed back, feeling embarrassed for expecting anything at all. 2 nights later, it happened again. This time, the glow appeared slightly off to the side, not directly beneath me. I noticed it out of the corner of my eye first, like a trick of peripheral vision. When I leaned over and looked straight down, it was there. Same pale light. Same lack of reflection. I held my breath without realizing it. The glow was stronger this time, bright enough that I could see the silt and weeds on the lake bottom, maybe 6 or 7 feet down. I watched carefully, looking for movement. There was none. The glow lasted longer this time, 10 seconds, maybe more. I lifted my paddle slowly and dipped the blade straight down into the glowing water. The light didn't react. That scared me more than if it had. When the glow faded, I paddled back to shore hard, not caring how obvious my panic looked. I didn't stop until the kayak scraped the gravel. That night, I had trouble sleeping. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured the glow stopping at the water's surface like a ceiling. I skipped the lake for a week. When I finally went back, I brought my friend Mark with me. He was practical, skeptical, and had a habit of talking through things until they made sense. If anyone could ground this, it was him. We went out just before dusk, each in our own kayak. I didn't tell him everything up front. I just said I'd seen something weird and wanted another set of eyes. We drifted near the center of the lake, chatting about work and nothing in particular. Then the water beneath Mark's kayak lit up. "Do you see that?" he said immediately. My stomach dropped. The glow was brighter than I'd ever seen it, wide enough to cover both kayaks. It was the same pale green-white, steady and silent. Mark leaned over, staring. "What the hell is that?" "It doesn't reflect," I said, and hated how calm my voice sounded. He dipped his paddle in. No reaction. The glow stayed on for a long time this time, long enough that Mark pulled out his phone and turned on the flashlight, aiming it at the water. The flashlight beam hit the surface and reflected normally, completely separate from the glow below. 2 different layers of light, not interacting. "Is it coming from below?" Mark asked. "I don't know," I said, and I really didn't. There was no source, no point of origin, just uniform light. After maybe 20 seconds, the glow dimmed and vanished. Mark sat back, breathing hard. "Okay," he said. "Okay, that's not algae." We paddled back in silence. On shore, Mark kept looking back at the lake like it might do something else. When nothing happened, he finally said, "We should come back with better lights. Maybe a depth finder, something." I nodded, but part of me didn't want answers anymore. Over the next month, the glow became unpredictable. Sometimes it appeared beneath the kayak, sometimes a few feet away. Once I saw it moving slowly under the surface, not fast, just drifting sideways like a cloud sliding beneath the water. It never broke the surface. It never reflected. Once I noticed that the glow seemed to dim when I stood up slightly in the kayak, then brighten again when I crouched lower. That could have been coincidence. I didn't test it again. Mark stopped coming out after the night the glow followed us halfway back to shore, always staying just out of reach, like it was keeping pace beneath the water. We didn't talk about that part much. The last time I went out was early fall. Colder air, fog forming low over the lake. I told myself it would be the last time, no matter what happened. The glow appeared almost immediately, brighter than ever. The fog above me stayed dark, untouched. I felt exposed sitting there, like I was floating on a thin skin over something vast. Then I noticed the water wasn't making sound anymore. No lapping, no drip from my paddle. The lake was perfectly still, even though I was drifting. I felt pressure in my ears, like descending in an elevator. Not painful, just noticeable. The glow pulsed once, faintly. I panicked then. No screaming, no thrashing, just a sudden, overwhelming need to be anywhere else. I paddled hard toward shore, and the sound of water came back instantly. The glow stayed where it was, not following this time. I didn't look back. I sold the kayak that winter. I still drive past the lake sometimes. It looks normal, calm, unremarkable. But at dusk, if the light hits the water just right, I catch myself watching the surface too closely, waiting to see something that doesn't belong there. I don't miss kayaking. What I miss is the certainty I had before I knew the water could light up without a reason. I woke up because my chest felt wrong. Not pain, not tightness. More like a low vibration, the way your body feels when you're standing near a generator or a truck idling too close. It wasn't loud enough to hear. It was just there, inside me, steady and even. I lay still for a few seconds, trying to figure out if it was coming from somewhere in the house. The heater was off. The fridge was on the other side of the wall, but it didn't cycle like that. The vibration didn't change when I held my breath or shifted my weight. It felt like it was coming from everywhere at once. I checked my phone. 2:47 a.m. The room was darker than usual. Not pitch black, but flat somehow, like the shadows weren't as deep. My bedroom window faced the backyard, and I could normally see a few stars through the branches of the oak tree back there. This time, I couldn't. I sat up slowly, waiting for the vibration to fade. It didn't. If anything, it felt a little stronger when I moved, like my body was closer to whatever was causing it. I swung my legs off the bed and stood. The floor felt normal, no shaking, no rattling. The vibrations stayed inside my chest, steady as a heartbeat that wasn't mine. I walked to the window and pulled the curtain back just enough to look out. The yard looked normal. Fence, shed, patchy grass I kept meaning to reseed. The sky above it didn't. The stars were there everywhere else I could see them, off to the sides near the horizon, but directly above my house there was a dull patch, like someone had smudged the sky with their thumb. No clouds, no movement. Just less light. I leaned closer to the glass, half expecting the reflection of my own face to explain it away. It didn't. The vibration in my chest pulsed once, slightly stronger, then settled back into its steady rhythm. That was when I noticed how quiet it was. Not peaceful quiet, empty quiet. The usual background stuff was gone. No distant highway noise, no dogs barking, no insects. Even the faint hum of power lines that I'd never consciously noticed before was missing. I stepped back from the window and glanced at the hallway. My wife, Erin, was asleep in the next room. I thought about waking her, then immediately felt stupid for considering it. What would I even say? Hey, the sky looks dim and my chest feels like a washing machine. I stood there another minute, listening to nothing, feeling that vibration fill my ribcage. Then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. No fade, no tapering off. 1 second it was there, the next it wasn't. My chest felt empty afterward, like the pressure drop after your ears pop. The quiet lifted too. Distant traffic came back. Somewhere down the block, a car alarm chirped once and stopped. Crickets resumed like they'd been paused. I waited for my heart to slow down. It took longer than it should have. I went back to bed and didn't sleep much after that. The next morning, I checked the weather out of habit. Clear skies overnight, no clouds, no wind, nothing unusual. I didn't say anything to Erin. It felt too thin to explain in daylight. That night, I went to bed early, telling myself I was just tired. I fell asleep fast. The vibration woke me again. This time it was weaker, like it was farther away. Still unmistakable. Still inside my chest. I checked the time. 2:46 a.m. I didn't go to the window right away. I lay there staring at the ceiling, waiting for it to stop. It didn't. I got up and pulled the curtain back again. The dim patch of sky was back. Same size, same shape, centered directly over the house. The stars beyond it looked normal, sharp and bright, like the sky had depth everywhere except that one spot. I stepped into the hallway and looked through the front window too. Same thing. The dullness followed the roofline exactly. I felt exposed standing there, even though nothing was moving and nothing was visible. I checked the rest of the house. Erin slept through everything. The dog, Milo, was curled up on the couch, awake but unusually still. His eyes followed me as I moved, but his tail didn't wag. When I knelt down and called his name softly, he didn't react. He just stared past me toward the ceiling. The vibration pulsed again, stronger this time. I stood up fast, heart racing, and the pulsing stopped. The steady vibration returned, like whatever it was didn't like sudden movement. I don't know why I thought this, but I got the sense that it wasn't coming from above in a straight line. It felt wider, spread out, like the whole house was inside something rather than under it. I went back to the bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed, watching the window. The dim patch didn't change. No lights, no shadows, no sound. After maybe 5 minutes, the vibration eased off and vanished again. The sky brightened back to normal at the same time, stars snapping back into clarity like someone adjusted a lens. I slept a little after that, but it was shallow and full of half-dreams. The third night, I didn't wake up. Instead, Erin did. She shook my shoulder around 3 in the morning, whispering my name. "Do you feel that?" she asked. My chest was already vibrating. I sat up so fast I got dizzy. You too? I said. She nodded, eyes wide. It's like, I don't know, like pressure. I didn't tell her about the sky. I just went to the window and pulled the curtain back. The dim patch was there again. Erin sucked in a breath. Why does it look like that? Neither of us touched the glass. We just stood there, shoulder to shoulder, staring up. The vibration was stronger than before. Not painful, but insistent, like standing too close to heavy equipment you know you shouldn't be near for long. Erin whispered, "Is it coming from outside?" "I don't know," I said, and meant it. The dog started whining softly from the living room. Not barking, not panicking, just a low, continuous sound that matched the vibration almost perfectly. I checked my phone, 2:47 a.m. The vibration peaked, holding steady for several seconds, then cut out completely. The sky returned to normal. The house settled back into its usual nighttime noises. Erin and I didn't talk much after that. We lay in bed, hands clasped, listening to the normal sounds like they were proof of something. The next morning, she asked if we should call someone. An electrician, a doctor, anyone. We didn't. The vibration didn't come back the next night, or the one after that. A week passed, then two. I started to convince myself it had been some weird combination of anxiety, coincidence, and sleep disruption. Erin stopped bringing it up. Then, one afternoon, I noticed something while taking the trash out. The grass on the roof-facing side of the house looked different, slightly flattened. Not dead, just pressed down like it had been under something heavy but soft. I stood there longer than I needed to, staring up at the clear blue sky. That night, I dreamed of pressure, of weight without shape. I woke up at 2:47 a.m. to silence. No vibration, no dim sky, but I stayed awake until morning anyway, waiting for something that never came. Sometimes, late at night, I still feel a phantom version of it in my chest, just for a second. Enough to make me stop what I'm doing and listen. The sky looks normal every time I check. I don't know if that means it's gone, or if it just learned when to come back. Every light in the park went out at the same time. I was halfway down the main path, the one that cuts through the center with the old oak trees and the benches that always smell faintly like rain. It was just after 9, late enough that most people were gone, but not so late that it felt unsafe. The sky was overcast, low clouds glowing faintly orange from the city. The air was warm and still, that kind of summer night where sounds carry farther than they should. The lights didn't flicker, they didn't dim. They shut off like someone flipped a single switch. The path disappeared under my feet. The trees collapsed into one dark mass. For half a second, my eyes didn't know what to do with it. I stopped walking automatically, heart jumping, waiting for my vision to catch up. That was when I noticed how quiet it got. Not peaceful quiet. More like the sound had been muted. I couldn't hear traffic from the street anymore, even though it was only a block away. The cicadas that had been buzzing nonstop went silent all at once. I could hear my own breathing too clearly. Someone laughed nervously behind me. "Did that just happen?" a guy said somewhere to my left. I turned, trying to place voices in the dark, but the shadows felt thicker than they should have. The glow from the city should have been enough to outline people. It wasn't. Then I looked up. The clouds were moving, but not the way clouds usually do. One section of darkness slid across them, smoother and faster, like a shadow passing over frosted glass. It didn't have a clear edge, but it blocked out the faint orange glow behind it completely. It wasn't shaped like anything I could name. Not round, not angular, just wrong in a way that made my eyes keep sliding off it. Someone near the benches whispered, "Is that a helicopter?" There was no sound. No chop of blades. No hum. Nothing. The dark shape moved from west to east, directly overhead. As it passed, the air felt heavier, like the pressure drop before a storm, except it didn't come with wind. My ears popped slightly. I swallowed and felt it in my jaw. My phone buzzed in my hand, making me flinch. I hadn't realized I was gripping it. No notification, just a vibration like it had lost signal and found it again. The shape crossed the park in maybe 3 seconds. The instant it cleared the far side, every light snapped back on. Path lights, lampposts, the old decorative lanterns near the playground. All of it, bright and normal, like nothing had happened. The cicadas started up again, mid-buzz, not ramping up, just continuing like they'd never stopped. Traffic noise rushed back in, too loud for a second before settling. People stood frozen where they were. A woman near the path said, "What the hell was that?" No one answered her. A couple with a stroller hurried toward the exit without looking back. The guy who'd laughed earlier pulled his phone out and started filming the sky, even though there was nothing there now but clouds. I stayed where I was, staring up, waiting for my pulse to slow down. It didn't. After a minute or two, people started talking over each other, trying to fill the silence. Power outage. Transformer. City grid glitch. Someone joked about aliens, but it came out thin and forced. I walked home as soon as my legs remembered how. That night, I didn't sleep much. Every time a car passed outside my apartment, I woke up, convinced the sound had stopped again. The next morning, the city's outage map showed nothing. No reports, no maintenance logs. I checked local news sites. Nothing. I went back to the park the following evening, telling myself I needed to see it in daylight. Everything looked normal. The grass was a little worn near the benches where people had clustered. That was it. I tried to convince myself it was a one-off. Some freak electrical thing combined with my imagination filling in gaps. 3 nights later, it happened again. This time, I was sitting on a bench near the pond, scrolling through my phone. A guy named Marcus was tossing a tennis ball for his dog a little ways off. I remember his name because he'd introduced himself earlier when the dog decided my shoe was a toy. The lights went out exactly the same way. Instant. Total. The dog froze mid-run, ball rolling to a stop beside it. It didn't bark. It didn't move. Just stood there, staring upward. Marcus said, "Hey," sharply, like he was scolding it. I looked up just in time to see the dark shape again. It was lower this time. I could tell because it blocked out more of the sky, and the sense of pressure was stronger, like something heavy passing just above the treetops. I stood without realizing I was doing it. The shape didn't cast a shadow the way you'd expect. The darkness seemed contained within it, like it was subtracting light rather than blocking it. As it passed overhead, my phone screen went black. Not off, black. The glow disappeared, but the device stayed warm in my hand. The air smelled faintly metallic, like rain on hot pavement, even though it hadn't rained. The lights snapped back on. Marcus swore loudly. "Okay. Nope, we're leaving." His dog bolted the second the lights came back, nearly yanking the leash out of his hand. Other people reacted faster this time. Joggers broke into sprints. A couple near the pond climbed the path toward the street without saying a word. I stood there a few seconds longer, staring at the empty sky. My phone restarted itself with a chime. I checked the time. I was missing 4 minutes. Not skipped notifications, not a frozen screen. The system clock showed a clean jump. I checked my step tracker out of habit. There was a gap there too. No data, just a flat line. I didn't tell anyone about that part. Over the next few weeks, I started noticing smaller things. Lights in the park would dim for half a second, then return to normal. The air would go still without warning. Sounds would drop out for a beat, then resume slightly out of sync, like an audio track catching up. Once walking through at dusk, I felt that pressure again and looked up just in time to see the clouds ripple, like something had passed between layers. No blackout that time, just the feeling. I stopped going through the park at night after that. Months passed. I was almost convinced it was over when it happened a third time, earlier than before. Late afternoon. Kids still on the playground. Clear sky. Every light went out. People screamed that time. I didn't see the shape clearly, just a dark movement overhead, faster than before. Purposeful. The lights came back on immediately. No missing time, no phone issues. Parents grabbed kids, someone called 911. I left before anyone could start asking questions. I still live nearby. Sometimes late at night, I hear the park go quiet from my apartment window. Not silent, just muted. When that happens, I don't look up. I wait for the lights I can't see from here to come back on, and I try not to think about how something that large could move that smoothly without making a sound. I still walk through the park during the day, but I never stay after dark anymore, and I don't trust the sky when it looks too still. The radio started doing it about 20 minutes into the drive, right after I left the last real town behind. I was heading west on Highway 50, late afternoon, the kind of road that stretches flat and empty for miles at a time. It was early October, dry and clear, the sun already dropping low enough to throw long shadows across the asphalt. I'd finished a job site inspection near Delta and was trying to get home before dark. I had the radio on low, half listening. Country station faded out, so I reached over and nudged the dial, just enough to catch something else. Instead of static, I heard a tone. Not loud, not sharp. Just a soft, steady sound, like someone humming a single note through clenched teeth. It sat between two stations, perfectly centered, not warbling the way weak signals usually do. I frowned and twisted the dial a little more. The tone disappeared instantly. Twisted it back. The tone came back. I tried that a few times, slowing the car slightly without realizing it. Every time the needle hit that exact spot, the sound returned. No voices, no rhythm, just that single flat note. I told myself it was interference, electrical noise, maybe a tower bouncing something weird across the valley. Still, it made the hair on my arms lift. I left it there and kept driving. The road dipped and rose gently, cutting through scrub and low hills. No trees, just pale grass and rock. The sky was wide and empty, the sun turning orange at the edges. I glanced at the horizon out of habit, then back to the road. That's when I noticed the light. It sat just above the far hills, slightly left of where the sun had gone down. Small, dim, not blinking, not moving, too bright to be a star, too steady to be anything else I recognized. I checked my mirrors, thinking maybe it was a reflection or another car lining up behind me. Nothing. The tone from the radio felt louder now, even though I hadn't touched the volume. I drove on. The light stayed exactly where it was relative to the horizon. As the road curved slightly, it didn't shift the way a distant tower or vehicle should have. It just hung there, like it was painted onto the sky. I swallowed and reached for the radio again, turning the dial a hair. The tone cut out. I turned it back. The tone returned immediately. I didn't like that connection forming in my head, so I turned the radio off completely. The cabin went quiet except for the hum of the tires and the faint rattle of something loose in the trunk. The light was still there. I told myself it was a planet, Venus maybe. Something like that, except it was too low and the color was wrong. It wasn't warm. It looked white, almost pale blue. As I crested a shallow rise, the light dipped slightly, like it was sinking. My stomach tightened. I eased off the gas. The car slowed, engine pitch dropping. The light continued its slow descent, perfectly smooth, like it was following the curve of the earth. I turned the radio back on without thinking. Static. Then the tone snapped back into place. Same pitch, same volume. I felt it then, a faint pressure behind my eyes, like the beginning of a headache. My ears felt full, the way they do when you're driving up a mountain too fast. The light continued to sink. I pulled onto the shoulder. The gravel crunched loudly under the tires, startling me. Dust puffed up and settled. I put the car in park and leaned forward over the steering wheel, staring through the windshield. The light was closer to the horizon now, maybe a finger width above it. The tone from the radio didn't change, but it felt closer somehow, like it wasn't coming from the speakers anymore. I checked them anyway, pressing my hand against the dash. The vibration I felt there didn't match the sound exactly. I looked at my phone, no signal, as expected. The time reads 6:42 p.m. I don't know why I did it, but I turned the radio off again. The silence felt wrong, too deep, like the world had taken a step back. The light kept sinking. A strange thought crossed my mind then, clear and uninvited. When it goes below the horizon, something will change. I didn't know what that meant. I just knew it felt true. The pressure in my head increased. Not painful, but distracting. My chest felt tight, like I'd been holding my breath without realizing it. The light touched the horizon. For a second, nothing happened. Then it slipped below the line of hills. The instant it disappeared, the radio clicked softly, even though it was off. Just a tiny mechanical sound, like a switch resetting. The pressure vanished. The air felt normal again. I took a deep breath that turned into a shaky laugh before I could stop it. My shoulders relaxed and I leaned back in the seat, suddenly aware of how tense I'd been. I started the car and pulled back onto the road, eager to put distance between myself and that stretch of highway. 10 minutes later, the radio came back on by itself. I jumped, swerving slightly before correcting. My heart hammered as I glanced at the dash. The volume was low, no tone, just static. I turned it off again, harder this time, like I could punish it into behaving. The rest of the drive passed without incident. Dusk deepened into early night. The road stayed empty. When I finally hit the outskirts of my town, I felt ridiculous for how shaken I was. At home, I didn't mention it to my wife. There wasn't anything to say that wouldn't sound stupid. I ate dinner, watched TV, went to bed. That night, I dreamed of driving the same road, except the horizon never came closer, no matter how long I drove. The light hung there, fixed, and the tone filled the car until it felt like it was vibrating my bones. I woke up before dawn, heart racing, ears ringing faintly. The next week, I took the same route again. I told myself I was being practical. It was the fastest way to get to the site. Still, my hands tightened on the steering wheel as I passed the spot where I'd pulled over before. The radio stayed normal. The sky was clear, no light. I relaxed, slowly. About 30 miles later, just as the sun dipped toward the horizon, the radio picked up the tone again. Soft, steady. I didn't touch the dial this time. I looked ahead. Far in the distance, just above the hills, the light was back. I didn't stop the car. I didn't slow down. I kept my eyes on the road and drove straight toward it, jaw clenched, pulse thudding in my ears. The light didn't sink this time. It stayed level, hovering just above the horizon, matching my speed perfectly. No matter how fast or slow I went, it held its position. The tone grew stronger, not louder, exactly. Fuller. Like it was filling the space inside the car. My phone buzzed in the cup holder. I glanced down. No notification. Just the screen lighting up, then going dark again. The pressure returned, heavier than before. My vision felt slightly off, like depth didn't work the way it should. Then, without warning, the light dropped. Straight down. It vanished below the horizon in less than a second. The tone cut off mid-note. The radio went dead. Not static. Nothing. The dashboard lights flickered once, then stabilized. I blinked hard, breathing fast, knuckles white on the wheel. The road ahead looked normal, but something felt off. The distance between mile markers seemed wrong, like I was covering ground too quickly. When I finally reached the turnoff to the site, my watch said I was 8 minutes ahead of schedule. I don't take that route anymore. Every once in a while, when I'm driving at sunset and the radio drifts between stations, I hear the edge of that tone again. I turn it off immediately, eyes flicking to the horizon before I can stop myself. So far, the light hasn't come back. I'm not sure what I'll do if it does. I was sitting in the empty lot behind the old Ridgeway Outlet Mall, the one they shut down years ago but never bothered to demolish. The place had become my go-to spot whenever I needed to clear my head during long drives. No traffic, no people, no lights, except the ones from passing cars way off on Route 6. It was around 10:30 p.m., late enough that the sky had gone fully dark, but early enough that I wasn't tired yet. I had stopped there because my GPS kept losing signal. I figured I'd sit for a minute, stretch, maybe let my phone reset itself. The air was cool and dry, the kind of early autumn night where sound travels weirdly far. Even the hum from the highway sounded too crisp. I parked near the middle of the cracked asphalt lot. Weed clusters pushed through the pavement here and there, and the building itself sat dark and hollow behind me. I shut the engine off and leaned back in my seat. For a few minutes, everything felt normal. Then my phone buzzed in the cup holder. I picked it up and saw the Compass app open, one I hadn't touched in weeks. It must have launched accidentally, or I'd tapped it when I grabbed the phone earlier. At first, I didn't think twice about it, but the compass needle was spinning, not drifting or flickering like when the magnetometer goes bad. Spinning. Smooth, continuous, maybe one full rotation every second. I tried tilting the phone, closing the app, reopening it. It kept doing the same thing. I'd had that phone for years. It had never done that. I opened the regular map app to see if the GPS was back. The blue location dot jumped around the screen like it was glitching. Half a mile north, then off the road entirely, then back near where I actually was, but still pulsing like it couldn't settle. The compass needle spun faster. I felt a tightening in my chest that I tried to brush off as the kind of random anxiety that hits when you're out alone at night in a place that's just quiet enough to feel wrong. Set the phone down and stepped out of the car, partly to see if getting away from the metal frame would calm the magnetometer. The spinning didn't stop. The lot felt bigger once I was standing in it. The dark swallow of the abandoned building behind me felt like it was leaning in. But the sky looked clear, no storms, no clouds, just an empty, moonless stretch of stars. For some reason, the silence felt heavier than it had minutes earlier. I held the phone out in front of me, turning in slow circles to see if the compass responded to my movement. It didn't. The needle just kept looping, steady as a clock hand. That was when the light appeared. A faint flash, white, thin, fast, cut across the sky above me in a perfectly straight line, not like a shooting star. Meteor trails arc or taper or leave slight burns. This was a clean path, like someone dragged a laser pointer across black paper. It lasted less than half a second. My first thought was satellite, but satellites don't streak, they drift. And this wasn't drifting. It was traveling too fast and too sharply. I turned toward the direction it had come from, squinting. The sky looked normal again. If anything, too normal. Then the compass needle stopped, just froze, pointing southeast. Right after that, my car headlights flickered. One short blink, so quick I almost convinced myself I imagined it. The dome light inside the car glowed faintly, even though the door was shut and the engine off. It faded after a second, like a dying battery. But the battery was fine. I'd just had it replaced that summer. I tried unlocking the car with the fob. It didn't respond the first time. The second press worked, but the beep sounded softer than usual, as if something in the background had dampened the sound. I got back in and shut the door. The air inside felt warmer than outside, though I'd turned everything off. I checked the time. 10:43 p.m. I'd only been outside for a minute or two. The compass needle started spinning again. Slower this time, but steady. I held my phone up against the windshield and noticed the spinning seemed to sync weirdly with the faint hum I'd assumed was the highway earlier. Except now the hum didn't sound distant. It sounded close, too close for comfort, like it was reverberating off the roof of the car. I turned the engine on, and my dashboard lights glowed a dull orange before brightening to their normal level. The radio, which always turned on automatically, stayed silent. Just the screen lit up with no station. When I hit the power button, the speakers made a soft popping sound, then went dead again. I didn't want to sit there anymore. I backed up slowly, half expecting the engine to stall or the lights to flicker. Neither happened. As I angled toward the exit, I glanced up at the sky again. Another flash streaked overhead. This one was dimmer but slower, slow enough that I realized it wasn't moving the way an object should. Instead of traveling in a curve or dispersing, the streak held a perfectly even thickness and brightness from one end to the other. It looked artificial, but not in a way I could describe, just clean, like geometry. The compass needle jerked wildly, then froze, pointing straight up before spinning again. I pressed harder on the gas. As I rolled toward the back exit, my headlights washed over the weeds and cracked pavement in those stark white beams that made everything look flat. For a moment, the asphalt seemed to ripple, like heat rising off a road in summer. But the night air was cold. And when I looked again, the pavement was normal. My phone buzzed. A notification I couldn't fully read flashed on the screen. Something about calibration failing, before disappearing. Then the compass closed itself. The home screen appeared. The signal bars returned. Everything seemed to snap back to normal. The humming stopped. The radio clicked back to life with static. The dashboard lights brightened just slightly, like they'd been dimmed without my noticing. I didn't slow down when I reached the road. I didn't look back at them all. I just got onto Route 6 and drove until the empty fields turned into houses and street lights, and the hum of normal noise returned. But several minutes later, while passing a dark stretch of farmland north of town, my headlights caught something reflective above the road. Quick, small, like a flash of metal or glass. I glanced up just in time to see another faint streak travel across the sky. Slower this time, almost deliberate. My compass app popped open again on its own. The needle pointed straight at it. Then everything went still. The streak faded into nothing, leaving only stars that suddenly looked too ordinary, like they were pretending not to have moved. The compass fixed itself the second the streak disappeared. I didn't open it again for the rest of the night. And even now, months later, sometimes my phone buzzes randomly in quiet places, parking lots, empty roads, wide fields, and the compass needle twitches for no reason I can explain. It always points southeast first, then straight up, then normal again, like nothing happened. I was somewhere between Woznian and Napoleon when the radio went dead. One second, it was some late night call in show out of Toledo, the host talking over a guy from Bowling Green about gas prices, and the next, it was just gone. No static, no fade out. Just a flat, empty silence that didn't even sound like the normal quiet between stations. I glanced down at the display. The station number was still there, the volume bar still halfway up. I nudged the knob anyway. Nothing changed. Great, I muttered, more to fill the space than anything else. It was close to midnight. Late July. Northern Ohio. The kind of humid summer night where the air feels thick even with the windows up and the AC on low. I was on County Road 13, the back way to my parents' place, because I'd left my buddy Nate's house too late and wanted to avoid the highway patrol. The world outside the headlights was just corn and soybeans and the occasional dark shape of a barn. No towns for a few miles, no gas stations, no other cars either. The last pair of headlights I'd seen had been 10 minutes earlier, coming the opposite direction. I tapped the radio off and back on. Still nothing, not even static when I spun the dial. Instead, a faint tone began. It came in underneath the dead silence like somebody had slid a tiny tuning fork inside the speakers. One soft, pure note. Not high enough to be painful, not low enough to feel like a vibration. Just a thin, clean tone that pulsed in a slow rhythm. On, off, off. I checked the display again. No station name, just FM 97.3 frozen there. When I twisted the knob to change it, the numbers moved, but the tones stayed. Same volume, same pattern, completely unaffected. The hair on the back of my neck stirred. I told myself it was some weird capacitor issue or a loose wire screwing with the audio. I'd bought the car used. The stereo already had quirks. Still, the timing of it felt strange. The tone pulsed at almost exactly the same tempo as my heartbeat. I tested it, held my fingers to my wrist, counting silently. 1 pulse, 2, 3. The tone lined up for several beats, then drifted slightly, then lined up again. Not perfect, but close enough that I noticed. I turned the radio off entirely. The tone kept going. That's when my stomach finally flipped. The display went completely black, as if it had lost power, and the rest of the dash dimmed for half a second before returning to normal. Check engine lights stayed off, RPM steady, temperature fine. Everything looked normal except for the dark radio screen and that thin, rhythmic tone still coming from the speakers. I cracked the window to see if the sound was actually in my head. Warm, damp air pushed in, carrying the smell of manure and cut grass. Crickets droned faintly in the distance. No tone. When I rolled the window back up, I heard it again. Clear as before. On, off. I gripped the steering wheel a little tighter and focused on the road. The cornfields on either side loomed high, taller than the car, blocking out any view of farmhouses beyond them. Every so often, I'd pass a break in the rows where a dirt lane cut through. Each time, my headlights would briefly wash over a mailbox or a metal gate before the corn walls closed in again. A few minutes went by like that. Just the hum of the engine and that soft, unnatural beeping in my ears. Then the tone changed. It doubled in speed, still soft, but the pulses now closer together. My chest tightened. It felt like someone had turned a dial inside my head. At the exact same moment, the fields opened up. I came to a long stretch where the land dipped away from the road into a broad, flat expanse planted with soy. The plants were low enough that I could see all the way across the field to the tree line and the old power lines that marched along the horizon like sharp black stitches. And there, ahead and slightly to the right, hovering over the field, was a dull red light. I saw it first as a smudge above the soybeans, like the end of a cigarette held in the dark. Then, as I got closer and the angle changed, it sharpened into a solid shape. Not perfectly round, not a point like a star, but more like the fuzzy circle you see when you stare at an LED through frosted glass. It hung maybe 20 or 30 feet above the ground, motionless. No blinking, no strobing, no beam, just a steady, muted red that didn't spill onto anything below it. I eased off the gas without realizing it. My speed dropped from 55 to 40, then to 35. The car felt too fast no matter what I did. My focus tunneled onto that light. The tone in the speakers shifted again, lowering in pitch slightly, still rhythmic, still detached from anything I did. I reached for my phone in the cup holder. The screen refused to turn on. The haptic buzz came through under my thumb, but the display stayed black like the backlight had died. No glow, no icons, Nothing. I held the power button. Nothing changed. "Come on," I whispered. The red light grew larger in the windshield as I approached. It stayed the same color, the same intensity. Dirt lanes branched off on both sides, empty and dark. No parked trucks, no yard lights, no signs of a farmhouse connected to that field. When I drew nearly parallel with the light, I realized how wrong it was. There was no reflection. The soybeans underneath it were just dark shapes in the wash of my headlights. The light didn't touch them at all. It didn't touch the road either. It was as if the air around it was the only thing allowed to participate. My instincts started screaming at me, but my body lagged behind, caught between wanting to slow down and wanting to floor it. I ended up settling somewhere in the middle, creeping past at maybe 20 miles an hour, eyes locked on the side window now. The red light remained exactly where it was, perfectly still, hovering over the field about 50 yards out. The tone in the speakers grew more insistent, not louder, just more present, like it was pressing against the inside of my ears. On, off, on, off, on, off. I could hear my own breathing now over the sound of the tires on asphalt. It sounded too loud in the small car. For 1 second, everything lined up, the car moving slowly forward, the empty road, the shadowy field, and that unnatural flat red glow hanging in the middle of it all. Then it shot upward, no ramp up, no acceleration, just instantaneous motion like someone had cut a frame out of reality. One moment it was there over the field, the next it was a streak zipping straight into the sky. A vertical smear of red, thin and impossibly fast, disappearing into the low clouds without ever bending or curving. The clouds themselves lit faintly from within, where the streak vanished. The glow spread out in a soft circle, then shrank back to normal gray. The tone cut out mid-pulse. Silence slammed into the car. Real silence, with only the engine and the faint hiss of tires left. My ears rang with the absence of that sound. I realized my foot had lifted fully off the gas. The car was coasting. I forced myself to look away from the rearview mirror, where I'd been expecting to still see some trace of red. There was nothing, just the empty road behind and the dark smear of field. I pressed the accelerator and watched the speedometer climb. 30, 40, 50. Off to my right, the brittle silhouettes of corn stalks rose again as the fields changed back from soy to tall crops. The tunnel closed in around me. For a few miles, I didn't dare glance at the sky. Eventually, curiosity or stupidity won out. I flicked my eyes upward through the windshield. The clouds looked ordinary. No glowing shapes. No strange holes. No streaks. My phone buzzed in the cup holder. I grabbed it so fast, I almost dropped it. The screen lit up normally, full brightness, icons all where they should be. A flood of delayed notifications came in. Group chat, email, a weather alert about possible fog after midnight. I opened the compass app without really knowing why. The little arrow spun twice, then settled. North was north again. I turned the radio back on. It came to life at normal volume, the call-in host droning about city council drama like nothing had happened. I spun the dial. Every station I hit was exactly where it should be, with normal static between them. I kept going until I reached the highway. When I pulled into my parents' driveway half an hour later, the porch light was on and the house looked exactly as it had for the past 20 years. My mom's ceramic rooster still sat lopsided on the front step. The maple tree still leaned slightly over the garage. Nothing felt any different out there. The sky was just sky. Inside, my dad was half asleep in his recliner with some late-night news show murmuring in the background. He glanced at the clock and asked if the drive had been okay. I heard myself say, "Yeah, fine," like I'd rehearsed it. It wasn't until I was alone in the guest room that I checked the time on my phone again. 12:07 a.m. The dashboard clock in my car had said 11:58 when I pulled into the driveway. I know because I looked, surprised I made it before midnight. 9 minutes difference. My car clock had always been dead on. I checked it compulsively against my phone on longer drives. Maybe it had just drifted. Maybe I'd misread it. I lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, listening to the distant sound of a passing train. Every time headlights swept the guest room curtains, my heart lurched, waiting to see a dull red instead of the normal white and yellow. Nothing strange happened the rest of the night. But a few weeks later, driving home along a different stretch of county road at dusk, the radio flickered. Just once. just enough for one soft, familiar tone to slip through between songs. A single pulse, so faint I could almost pretend I'd imagined it. Then everything went back to normal, and the sky above the fields stayed empty.